Tonight we begin with a date that should feel impossible. Around 11,600 years ago, long before Sumer raised its temple platforms from the mud of southern Mesopotamia, stone pillars were already standing in southeastern Anatolia. Archaeologists working at Göbekli Tepe, including teams connected with major museums and universities in Europe and America, have studied carved animals, buried enclosures, and layers of human labour that seem older than farming villages were once supposed to allow. Radiocarbon dating places parts of that strange sanctuary deep in the period after the last ice age, when the world was warming, rivers were shifting, and human beings were learning to live with a sky that no longer behaved quite as their ancestors remembered. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, write your location and local time in the comments. There is something quietly beautiful about knowing that someone is listening in Manila at midnight, someone in Toronto before dawn, someone in London under rain, and someone far away beneath a hot, dark window. Now you let your mind drift backward, not to the pyramids, not to Babylon, not even to the first written tablets of Sumer. You move past all those familiar monuments, past the names that schoolbooks like to polish until they shine. You pass kings, temples, flood legends, and gods with horned crowns. You pass the Anunnaki themselves, those powerful figures who appear in Mesopotamian myth as judges, rulers, and keepers of cosmic order. Then the path becomes quieter. There are no inscriptions here. There are no royal boasts carved into stone. There is only dry earth, animal bone, charcoal, chipped flint, and the soft patience of archaeologists brushing dust from something that has waited longer than language. The air feels still. The ground holds heat. Somewhere, reeds whisper beside a river that has not yet learned the names later people will give it. You're standing near the beginning, or what used to be called the beginning. That is the trouble with beginnings. They keep moving. For generations, the old classroom story seemed fairly neat. People discovered agriculture, settled down, built villages, created surplus food, invented social hierarchy, and eventually produced temples, writing, law, and civilization. It was a tidy ladder, and tidy ladders are comforting. They make history feel like a staircase someone planned in advance. But archaeology has an inconvenient habit. It opens the floor. Research from institutions such as Oxford, Stanford, and the University of Chicago has helped reshape the study of early societies, not by turning every myth into fact, but by making the past more complicated. Excavations across the Near East show that ritual gathering, symbolic architecture, long-distance exchange, and shared belief may have developed alongside farming, or even helped encourage it in some regions. The old question, then, begins to change. Instead of asking when civilization began, you begin asking what people were already trying to become before cities existed. That question is gentle, but it is not small. It leads toward the mystery at the center of this long night. What came before the Anunnaki? What existed in human imagination before Sumerian scribes pressed divine names into clay? Was there an earlier layer of sacred order, an old pattern of memory, a forgotten system of sky, stone, labour, and fear that later Mesopotamian religion inherited without fully remembering? Perhaps there was no zero civilization in the literal sense. Perhaps there was no single lost empire, no vanished capital beneath the mud, no secret dynasty erased by flood water and time. That is the sensible caution, and it matters. Archaeologists do not build truth from desire. They build it from layers, dates, tools, bones, seeds, buildings, and patterns that can be tested. Still, human beings are not made only of evidence. They are also made of memory, and memory can survive in strange disguises. It can hide inside ritual. It can cling to place names. It can pass through myths that no longer explain themselves. It can become a story of gods arriving from some deeper age, not because gods literally stepped out of the sky, but because human communities sensed that their own world rested upon older foundations. Softly, you can feel that idea settling. The Sumerians, who lived in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, did not imagine themselves as inventing existence from nothing. Their myths speak as if order had to be received, assigned, granted, or restored. Cities were not merely built, they were given. Kingship did not simply emerge through politics. It descended fields, canals, rituals, crafts, and offices all belonged to a divine arrangement that seemed older than any living person. One mainstream fact is clear. By the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, southern Mesopotamia had developed some of the earliest known urban societies, with cities such as Uruk growing into vast centres of labour, trade, administration, and ritual life. Clay tablets from this world preserve accounts, rations, offerings, and names, showing a society already organised in astonishing detail. Yet these tablets do not feel like a first breath. They feel like a system already in motion. That is where the mystery begins to breathe beside you. Writing appears, and suddenly you see civilization with its eyes open. But what about the long darkness before the eyes opened? What about the hands that shaped clay tokens before writing? What about the people who counted sheep, grain, beer, and labour with objects no larger than a thumb? What about the ritual specialists, builders, mourners, healers, hunters, and storytellers who lived before gods had fixed titles? The records confirm a world of administration. The silence suggests a world of memory. A quirky detail helps soften the dust. Some earlier counting tokens were shaped into tiny cones, spheres, discs, and cylinders, almost like a miniature office supply set made for a civilization that had not yet invented the office. There is something oddly funny about imagining the first bureaucratic headache beginning with a clay ball and a goat that refused to be counted. Humanity changes. But paperwork has ancient roots. Very ancient roots. Still, beneath that small smile, the deeper question remains, if later Mesopotamian religion describes humans as workers for the gods, where did that image come from? Was it purely a reflection of temple economies, where ordinary people supplied grain, wool, oil, and labour to powerful institutions? Or did it preserve a much older memory of communities organising themselves around sacred tasks long before the Anunnaki became the grand names attached to cosmic authority? Scholars still debate how directly myth can be used as evidence for prehistoric experience. Some would warn that Sumerian texts come from literate urban societies and cannot simply be projected backward into the deep Stone Age. Others suggest that myths, while not historical reports, may preserve emotional structures shaped by older social realities. In a calm way, both sides are useful. One protects you from fantasy. The other keeps you from flattening ancient people into data. You continue walking. The landscape around you is not yet the Mesopotamia of walled cities and temple towers. It is a world of marsh edges, wild grasses, grazing animals, and seasonal uncertainty. The smell is dry dust mixed with river mud. The sun presses against the back of your neck. A bird calls somewhere above the reeds. Far away, a group of people moves across the plain, carrying baskets, skins, stone tools, and stories. They do not know they are prehistoric. Nobody ever does. To them, the world is immediate. Weather matters, hunger matters, birth matters. The dead matter, the stars matter, because they return when everything else changes. The moon thins, vanishes, and returns like a promise that is also a warning. Herds move, floods come, children ask why. Elders answer with stories that are not yet literature, but are already architecture for the mind. Long before recorded history, people may have looked at the ruins of earlier camps, older graves, abandoned ritual places, and strange stones left by those who came first. They may have wondered, as you wonder now, who made this, and why did they leave? That question may be older than civilization itself. In time, the Sumerians would create a world where gods had names, cities had patrons, and cosmic order could be imagined as a structure. The Anunnaki would become part of that structure, solemn and powerful, moving through myths like figures seen by lamplight on a temple wall, but tonight you're not rushing toward them. You are pausing in the dimness beneath them, because perhaps the Anunnaki were not the first answer. Perhaps they were an answer placed over older questions, and those questions rise from the ground slowly. Like heat after sunset, they rise from stone circles buried on purpose. They rise from clay tokens, animal carvings, skulls beneath floors, and rivers that changed their courses while generations slept and woke and slept again. They rise from the strange human need to believe that order exists somewhere above hunger, above death, above the confusion of being alive. For a moment, it feels as though the whole ancient world is holding its breath. Not dramatically, not loudly, just waiting. And as you listen, with the room around you growing softer, the first outline of the Zero civilization begins to appear, not as a lost kingdom with shining towers, not as a single hidden empire waiting for a heroic discovery, more like a shadow behind several lamps, a pattern, a memory of structure before structure had writing, a human attempt to turn fear into rhythm, death into ritual, and landscape into meaning. Perhaps that is what came before the Anunnaki, not gods, not cities, a question. And perhaps, in the oldest layers of human memory, that question has never fully gone silent. Your mind drifts into a land before its famous names. There is no Babylon here, no no Akkad, no priest reciting polished hymns beside a temple stair. The plain is lower, wetter, stranger, and less certain. The air smells of silt, crushed reeds, animal hide, and sun-warmed clay. Rivers spread into branches and marshes, then draw back again, leaving silver pools where birds step carefully through the mud. The sky looks enormous because almost nothing rises high enough to interrupt it. You are in the world before southern Mesopotamia became a theatre of kings. The ground beneath your feet is soft in places, cracked in others. Salt gathers like pale breath at the edges of old water. Date palms have not yet become the ordered wealth of later estates. Canals have not yet turned the land into a deliberate machine. But people are here, moving with the seasons, watching the rivers, testing the soil, returning to favoured places because memory itself has begun to map the earth. This is not emptiness. It is preparation. Archaeology confirms that long before the earliest Sumerian cities, communities across the Fertile Crescent were already experimenting with settled life, plant management, animal herding, and ritual gathering. Research associated with the University of Chicago's long tradition of Mesopotamian archaeology, along with work discussed in major scientific journals, has shown that early societies did not appear suddenly. They formed gradually through local choices, climate pressure, social cooperation, and a stubborn human refusal to remain simple. That is important, because ancient people were never waiting to become interesting. They already were. You can imagine them by the riverbank, though not as crude shadows in a textbook margin. They know the smell of coming rain. They know which reed cuts the hand cleanly, and which bends well for baskets. They know where fish gather when water lowers. They know the bird calls that mean a fox is near. Their world is not written, but it is not ignorant. It is read through tracks, wind, taste, scar, hunger, and memory. A child learns by watching. An elder teaches without parchment. A hunter notices that a herd returned late this year. A woman sorting seeds feels that some grains are heavier than others. A small group builds a shelter where their grandparents once camped, not because a law commands them, but because the place already feels thick with the dead. A hearth is rebuilt over older ash. A floor is repaired. A post hole is dug where another post once stood. Slowly, repetition becomes tradition, and tradition, if repeated long enough, begins to feel like order. In this early world, the future is not yet a straight line. It moves in cycles: wet season, dry season, birth, hunger, migration, return, moon, darkness, moon again. The body understands time before the mind measures it. Feet remember pathways before maps exist. Hands remember how to shape clay before clay becomes scripture. You hear insects near the water. The sound is small but endless. Somewhere in the deeper north and west, older ritual landscapes have already changed what scholars thought they knew about early social life. Sites with monumental stone features, communal buildings, and carefully arranged spaces suggest that shared belief may have gathered people together before agriculture fully stabilized them. Some researchers connected with Stanford and Oxford have explored how symbolic behavior, ritual cooperation, and environmental change may have pushed early communities into new forms of organization. The debate remains open, but the old ladder of progress looks less certain now. Did farming create ritual centers, or did ritual centers help pull people toward farming? That question does not need a loud answer. It only needs a long silence. You feel that silence over the plain. For a time, the people here do not need gods with finished genealogies. They need places: a bend in the river where offerings are left, a mound where ancestors are buried, a stand of reeds where women cut stems for mats while speaking softly of births, losses, and dreams. A patch of high ground that remains dry when the flood spreads across the lowland like a slow animal. From such places, memory gathers weight. A quirky tidbit survives in the wider region's archaeological imagination. Some very early communities buried skulls beneath house floors, sometimes plastering and shaping them with care. It sounds unsettling, and yes, a little awkward for home decoration. Yet it may have been a tender act, a way of keeping ancestors close enough to remain part of daily life. The dead were not always gone. Sometimes they were literally downstairs. This is where the Zero civilization becomes less like a fantasy and more like a question about layers. Not a glittering lost empire, not a vanished world with metal machines humming under the desert. Something quieter may be enough. A civilization before civilization might mean a network of customs, fears, sacred places, seasonal meetings, inherited paths, and remembered catastrophes. It might mean people already living inside invisible structures before cities made those structures visible. They did not need writing to have law-like habits. They did not need kings to have authority. They did not need temples to have sacred ground. The later Sumerians would inherit a land already touched by deep time. When their scribes described divine order, kingship descending, and cities chosen by gods, they were not speaking from a blank beginning. They lived on top of older settlements, older river courses, older graves, and older stories whose first speakers had vanished into the soil. Even when names were forgotten, patterns could remain. This is how the past hides from itself. A story becomes a ritual becomes a custom becomes the way things have always been. Then one day, a scribe writes it down, and the written version pretends to be the beginning. But the hand holding the reed stylus is already late. Very late. The heat begins to soften. Evening comes slowly across the marsh, turning water bronze and insects louder. Smoke rises from a small hearth. Someone roasts fish over coals. Someone rubs cracked feet after walking through mud all day. A child falls asleep against a woven mat. Hearing adults speak in low voices about the river, the dead, the animals, and the strange lights that return in the sky. Nothing here looks like empire, yet almost everything empire will need is already present. Labour shared between bodies, food counted by memory, trust negotiated through kinship, fear answered by ritual, land divided by habit, time marked by stars, seasons, and the return of floodwater. authority carried in the voice of those who remember, meaning attached to places that survive longer than any one life. Some scholars still debate whether early complexity should be called civilization at all. The word can become a trap, because it often privileges cities, writing, hierarchy, and monumental architecture. Other researchers prefer to speak of social complexity, ritual landscapes, or long-term cultural development. That caution is useful. It keeps you from mistaking every old mound for Atlantis wearing a clay hat. Still, the emotional truth remains powerful. Before the Anunnaki could be imagined as divine powers of the ordered world, human beings had already begun the harder work of ordering themselves. They had already learned that a river could feed and destroy. They had already learned that the dead could govern the living. They had already learned that a place could become sacred if enough footsteps returned to it. Perhaps the first hidden timeline is not a list of forgotten kings. Perhaps it is a sequence of repeated gestures, a hand pressing seed into damp soil, a body lowered beneath a floor, a stone set upright, a song repeated until nobody remembers who first sang it, a story told at night to explain why the sky watches, why the flood comes, why humans must work, and why something older always seems to stand just beyond the firelight. The marsh grows darker. The reeds become black lines against the fading west. And in that quiet, before the gods have fully taken their names, you feel the world preparing to remember itself. For a moment, it feels as though the earth has learned to speak, not in a human voice, not yet in songs written for temples or kings, but through small marks pressed into clay while the surface is still damp. A reed touches mud, a hand pauses, a sign remains. Then another sign, then a number, then a name. Slowly, the silence of deep time begins to break into fragments you can hold. You are no longer standing only among reeds and riverbanks. You are near a storehouse, or a temple office, or a room where people are counting things that matter. Grain, wool, oil, beer, goats, workers, offerings. The air is thick with dust and human breath. Clay tablets lie drying on shelves. Baskets lean against a wall. Somewhere nearby, someone complains about missing barley, because even at the dawn of writing, someone is already certain the account is wrong. That is almost comforting. The earliest writing in southern Mesopotamia appears near the end of the 4th millennium before the Common Era, especially in the great city of Uruk. Archaeological research linked with the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute, now called the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures, has shown that these early tablets were mostly practical records. They counted goods, people, and labour. They were not created first for poetry, love letters, or grand philosophy. The first written human concerns were often administrative, not romantic perhaps, but very human. Yet even these plain tablets open a strange doorway. They show you a society already organised enough to need record keeping. That means the moment writing begins is not the moment complexity begins. Writing is more like a lamp suddenly lit inside a house that has been occupied for a long time. Once the lamp is burning, you can see rooms, tools, shelves, and shadows. But the house itself was not built at the instant the flame appeared. This is the quiet shock of ancient records. They feel early, yet they are already late. Your eyes move across the clay. Some marks are numbers, some refer to commodities, some may represent offices, institutions, or personal names. These tablets do not tell you a complete story, but they prove that people had already built a world of obligation. Someone owes grain, someone receives wool, someone supervises workers, someone brings offerings, someone measures time by rations and tasks. The clay does not shout, it keeps receipts. Later, Sumerian texts would grow richer, deeper, and more mysterious. They would speak of cities founded under divine protection, of kingship descending from heaven, of gods assigning destinies, and of a cosmic order that humans could disturb but never fully control. By then, writing had moved beyond counting. It had become a vessel for memory, power, praise, fear, and explanation. Still, even when myths finally appear in written form, they do not feel like fresh inventions. They feel like old stories entering an official archive. You imagine a scribe sitting in filtered light, perhaps inside a school where young students learn signs by repetition. His fingers are dusty. His reed stylus is cut to a clean point. He copies words that already carry authority, because teachers copied them before him. The room smells of clay, sweat, and reed mats. Outside, the city continues its ordinary noise. Donkeys bray. Workers argue. Bread bakes. Dogs nose through refuse with professional enthusiasm. Civilization is sacred, yes. It is also extremely busy. Among the most famous ancient Mesopotamian texts is the Sumerian king list, a document preserved in later copies that arranges rulers and cities into a sweeping sequence. It begins with kingship descending from heaven, then names cities and rulers from an age before a great flood. Some reigns are impossibly long, stretching into thousands of years. To modern eyes, this is not a normal royal record. It is something stranger, part political memory, part sacred history, part cosmic architecture. A council decree proves authority in some periods, but a mythic list tries to prove eternity. Here the hidden beginning appears again, not as a clear fact, but as a pattern. The Sumerians did not simply say, "Our kings began yesterday." They placed kingship in a time almost beyond human reach. They imagined political order as something that arrived from above, before ordinary history, before familiar cities, before the flood that divides memory like a blade through soft clay. That should make you pause, because when a society explains its institutions by placing them in a remote sacred past, it may be doing more than boasting. It may be admitting that its own origins are partly unknown. The older the authority, the stronger it seems. The farther away the beginning, the harder it becomes to question. Scholars still debate how the king list should be read. Some treat it mainly as royal ideology, a way for later cities and dynasties to claim legitimacy through an ordered past. Others see it as a layered memory, combining real rulers, city traditions, flood mythology, and inherited ideas about time. The debate remains unresolved, and that is useful. It keeps the clay alive instead of locking it in one explanation. You feel the tablet's weight in your imagined hand. It is small, but it carries a large silence. A quirky detail comes from scribal training itself. Students in ancient Mesopotamia sometimes copied model texts again and again, much like children today practicing handwriting, except with wet clay and a tool that could ruin your day if the angle was wrong. Some school exercises even preserve mistakes. Across thousands of years, you can almost hear a tired teacher sighing as another student mangles a sign. History is grand, but education has always involved somebody being corrected. This tiny human closeness matters. It reminds you that ancient records are not ghostly messages from perfect beings. They were made by people with sore wrists, tired eyes, ambitions, fears, and probably opinions about lunch. Yet through them, something older entered written memory. Gods were named, cities were ranked, floods were remembered, human labour was counted, cosmic order was turned into signs, and still, the first page is missing. That is the strange feeling at the heart of these tablets. They preserve beginnings that already assume earlier beginnings. Kingship descends. But from where exactly? Cities chosen, but why those places? Gods assign roles, but who taught humans to imagine the universe as a bureaucracy of divine officers? The texts answer some questions and create others. Your mind drifts toward the phrase zero civilization. Again, it does not need to mean a lost superpower. It may mean the unwritten foundation beneath written order, the stage of human organization so old that later societies could only describe it through gods, floods, giant rains, and sacred descent, a buried preface, a vanished grammar of authority. The Sumerian tablets do not reveal that world directly. They reveal its absence. You see it in the way later scribes speak as though they inherited order instead of inventing it. You see it in the way divine powers are tied to offices, cities, craft, and cosmic regulations. You see it in lists that stretch backward beyond plausible memory, as if ordinary history was not enough to explain why the world had become so structured. Perhaps this is how memory behaves when it reaches its limit. It stops recording and begins myth-making. The room grows dim around the tablets. A lamp flame trembles. The clay shelves turn amber in the low light. Outside, the streets of an early city settle into evening, though work continues somewhere beyond your sight. Someone still counts grain. Someone still seals a jar. Someone still carries beer to a doorway where an offering must be made before night. Above them, the gods have names. Beneath them, the earth keeps older names hidden, and you begin to understand that the first written records are not the beginning of the story. They are the moment the story becomes visible enough to trouble you, because every sign pressed into clay seems to whisper the same uneasy thought. We are recording what we already know, but we do not know how long we have known it. Long before recorded history, something taught human beings to connect power with memory, labour with sacred duty, and place with destiny. The Sumerian tablets preserve those connections in fragments. They do not explain them completely. They do not need to. Their incompleteness is part of their spell. You set the tablet down gently. Dusk gathers at its edge, and somewhere inside its broken beginning the hidden timeline waits. In your ears, the echo changes into something older than a name. The phrase zero civilization sounds dramatic at first, almost too sharp for the soft darkness of this journey. It suggests a vanished capital, a buried throne room, a door beneath the desert with secrets waiting behind it. That is the tempting version. That is also the version you must handle carefully, like a lamp near dry straw. The past does not become true because it feels mysterious. And yet, some mysteries remain. You stand now in a space between evidence and imagination, not outside scholarship, and not trapped inside fantasy either. The zero civilization is best approached as a question, a shadow shape, a way of asking whether human societies carried deep systems of meaning before they had cities strong enough to leave clear ruins. It may not have been one kingdom. It may not have had one language. It may have been a pattern, repeated across landscapes, until later people mistook inheritance for revelation. A pattern can outlive its makers. That thought matters. Think of a road used for generations. At first, it is only flattened grass. Then it becomes a track. Then carts deepen it. Then stones mark its edges. Long after the first walkers are forgotten, everyone says the road has always been there. No one remembers the first footstep. Civilization may have grown in a similar way, from repeated gestures too old to name. Archaeology does not confirm a single lost prehistoric civilization beneath Sumer. That is the plain historical fact, and it should remain in the room with you. Research from major universities and journals places the rise of urban life in southern Mesopotamia within long developments of farming, irrigation, temple institutions, craft specialization, and exchange. The evidence shows gradual growth, regional variation, and many experiments. Not one neat, vanished empire waiting beneath every mound. But the absence of a lost empire does not mean the absence of an older order. This is where the question becomes more interesting. Zero civilization might be the unseen stage before writing, before royal lists, before divine genealogies, when communities were already learning how to coordinate labor, remember ancestors, measure seasons, and sanctify places. It might be the world of repeated rituals, shared fears, and inherited rules that later scribes dressed in divine clothing. It might be the deep foundation beneath the Anunnaki, not as beings, but as the idea that existence itself needed supervisors. That idea is ancient, perhaps older than kings. You walk through an imagined settlement on the edge of a changing river. Nothing here announces itself as civilization in the grand style. There are storage pits, hearths, reed shelters, plastered floors, and a cleared space where people gather at certain times. You smell damp clay underfoot and bitter smoke from a cooking fire. A rough wooden frame holds drying fish. Children chase each other between baskets while adults pretend not to smile. Then, in the centre, there is a place where laughter lowers. It may be a shrine, it may be a burial ground, it may be only a special patch of earth where people leave small offerings because their grandparents did the same. A stone stands there, not tall enough to impress a tourist, but important enough that no one moves it. Around it, custom gathers. Around custom, authority gathers. Around authority, memory hardens. No tablet records it. Still, everyone knows this is how a system can exist before anyone has a word for system. A child learns where not to step. A young hunter learns which elder must speak before a dangerous journey. A woman preparing grain knows what portion belongs to the living and what portion belongs elsewhere. A death changes the arrangement of bodies and food. A birth changes which doorway receives blessing. No palace is needed. Order has already begun its quiet work. The quirky tidbit is that some archaeologists studying early ceremonial sites have found deliberate backfilling, where monumental spaces were buried on purpose. Imagine building a sacred place with enormous effort, then carefully covering it as if putting a giant stone memory to sleep. It feels odd to modern minds. We usually preserve monuments by keeping them visible. Some ancient communities may have preserved meaning by hiding it. That is wonderfully strange. It also fits the mood of the Zero civilization. What if some of the older systems were not built to be displayed forever? What if they were performed, renewed, covered, abandoned, and remembered only in changed forms? What if later myths about vanished ages came partly from the experience of living near places whose meanings had already been sealed beneath earth? Scholars still debate how much continuity can be traced between prehistoric ritual landscapes and later Mesopotamian religion. Some researchers argue for caution, because thousands of years separate many early sites from Sumerian texts. Others see possible long-term themes, such as ancestor veneration, sacred architecture, animal symbolism, seasonal gatherings, and the social power of ritual labour. The honest answer is not a wall, it is a mist. You can see shapes there, but not every shape is safe to name. So you move slowly. This journey is not asking you to believe that the Anunnaki replaced an earlier pantheon from a forgotten world. It is asking something subtler. Before the Anunnaki were named, what human needs made such gods imaginable? Before divine assemblies ruled fate in myth, what earthly assemblies taught people that decisions could come from above? Before gods demanded labour, what social institutions taught people that labour could be sacred, owed, measured, and inherited? Questions like these are soft, but they open deep rooms. Consider the first person who watched a flood destroy stored grain. Consider the first group that survived because they had worked together earlier, digging channels, raising platforms, storing seeds, sharing warning signs. After such survival, cooperation would no longer feel merely practical. It would feel blessed. It would feel like the difference between life and disappearance. The group might remember not just what was done, but how it was done, who ordered it, where offerings were placed, which season was chosen, which star stood visible before dawn. Over time, emergency becomes ritual. Ritual becomes authority. Authority becomes myth. Then, many generations later, a scribe writes that the gods established order. He is not lying in the simple sense. He is describing a reality shaped by centuries of obedience, fear, memory, and ceremony. He writes the divine version because the human beginning is too far away to see. That may be the Zero civilization. Not a place, but a lost layer of explanation. The hidden timeline begins to stretch. First, there are mobile groups following animals and seasons, then repeated gathering places, then ritual centres, then managed plants and animals, then villages with memories buried under floors, then regional exchange, or then temples, storage, specialist labour, accounting, cities, kings, and written myths explaining why all of this must be so. Each stage overlaps. Nothing is perfectly clean. History rarely behaves like a staircase. It behaves more like a river delta, dividing into channels, rejoining, flooding, drying, and leaving behind silty traces where people later build houses. Southern Mesopotamia itself teaches this lesson. Its rivers move, its coastlines shift, its marshes remember older water. A city may stand where mud once swallowed footprints. The zero civilization then may be hidden not because it was erased by enemies, but because it was never solid in the way later civilization became solid. It lived in habits. It moved with families. It breathed through ceremonies. It passed from mouth to mouth until its original shape dissolved into sacred certainty. You feel the ground cooling. Night settles over the settlement. A distant drum, or perhaps only hands striking a skin, marks a rhythm near the gathered place. Firelight touches faces and disappears in their eyes. No one speaks of prehistory. No one speaks of mythology. They speak of rain, hunger, birth, ancestors, and the warning dream someone had before dawn. One elder points toward the dark. A child listens. This is how worlds begin, not always with conquest, not always with invention. Sometimes with someone explaining why a stone must remain where it is, why the dead should be fed, why a season must be watched, why work must be shared, and why the living are never the first to occupy the land. Later ages will give such truths grander forms. They will name gods. They will rank heavens. They will assign functions to divine beings and call sacred order by sacred words. The Anunnaki will enter the story like judges from a high chamber, but beneath them, older human arrangements may still breathe. That is why the zero civilization remains compelling. It is not a claim carved in stone. It is a listening posture. You listen for what vanished before writing could catch it. You listen for the first systems of fear and care. You listen for the unnamed teachers of the later gods. And in that listening, the ancient world feels less like a beginning and more like an inheritance whose first owner has stepped beyond the firelight. Perhaps no one built the zero civilization. Perhaps everyone did. And perhaps that is why it's so difficult to find. Your mind moves toward the places where cities have not yet risen. The land is not empty, but it has not decided what shape it wants to become. Low houses gather in small clusters. Footpaths run between hearths, storage areas, animal pens, and workspaces where hands repeat the same motions across many seasons. The smell of grain dust hangs in the air. Clay clings to ankles after rain. Smoke darkens roof beams. A grinding stone waits beside a wall, patient as an old thought. You're watching settlement become habit. This is one of the most important changes in human history, though it does not look dramatic while it happens. Nobody blows a horn and announces that humanity has entered a new era. People simply return, they mend a wall, they store seed, they bury a relative near the living, they clear weeds from a path because the path now matters. They remember where water gathers and where snakes hide in warm stones. A home begins as shelter, then it becomes memory. Archaeology across the Near East shows that settled communities developed long before the great cities of southern Mesopotamia. Excavations at early village sites reveal houses, storage systems, tools, burials, and evidence of changing relationships with plants and animals. Research connected with universities such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago has helped show that the shift toward village life was uneven, experimental, and deeply local. There was no single morning when wandering ended and civilization began. The process was slower, much slower. You feel that slowness under your feet. A child is born in one house and grows old near the same doorway. A grandmother knows the crack in a plaster floor because she helped smooth it when she was young. A family returns to the same storage pit after a hungry year. A neighbour remembers who shared grain when the harvest failed. Debt, gratitude, resentment, loyalty, and gossip begin to thicken the air. Village life creates closeness. Closeness creates rules. Rules create pressure. This pressure is not written, but it is real. You know who may enter which house. You know where tools belong. You know who speaks during a dispute. You know whose dead lie under which floor. You know when laughter is welcome and when silence is safer. A person can be generous, lazy, skilled, difficult, respected, feared, loved, or quietly avoided. Society grows not only from food production, but from the emotional difficulty of living near other humans for a long time. A little gentle sarcasm fits here. Civilization may begin when everyone knows your business. That is not a small thing. In mobile life, conflict can sometimes be managed by distance. In village life, distance shrinks. People must negotiate constantly. Boundaries become important. Shared labor becomes unavoidable. Storage becomes both practical and political, because stored food always raises the question of who controls it. A granary is never just a granary. It is tomorrow made visible. When grain is stored, future hunger enters present conversation. Someone must guard it. Someone must measure it. Someone must decide when to open it. Someone must explain why one family receives more than another. Long before scribes count barley on tablets, villagers are already counting fairness in memory. That kind of counting can be sharper than numbers. It can cut friendships. The hidden timeline becomes clearer here. Before temples command labor on a monumental scale, small communities learn the grammar of cooperation. They build together, harvest together, mourn together, and argue together. They discover that shared work needs shared stories. A ditch is easier to dig if everyone believes the ditch matters. A wall is easier to repair if neglect feels shameful. A ritual is easier to repeat if the dead are believed to notice. This is how practical life touches the sacred. A mainstream fact rests quietly beneath this scene. Early farming and village life in the wider Fertile Crescent developed over thousands of years after the last ice age, shaped by climate change, local plant resources, and human experimentation. Studies in journals such as Science and Nature have discussed how domestication was not a single invention, but a long relationship between people, landscapes, and species. That relationship was intimate. It was also strange. A quirky tidbit lies in the details of early food. Ancient people did not wake up one day with perfect wheat, tidy fields, and a charming rustic breakfast plan. Early cultivation involved trial, loss, pests, weather surprises, and grains that could be stubbornly inconvenient. Imagine persuading wild plants to behave while also keeping hungry goats from ruining your serious agricultural vision. The goats were probably not impressed. Still, the work continued. Hand-selected seeds, feet pressed paths into soil. Children learned which plants to gather and which to avoid. Dogs hovered near scraps. Clay-lined pits protected stores against damp and insects, though not always successfully. People began to alter the environment, and the environment altered them in return. Bones, teeth, and tools tell parts of this story. So do floors rebuilt again and again. Before the cities rose, there were these repetitions. Before divine economies, there were households. Before kingship descended from heaven, authority sat near a hearth and spoke in a voice everyone recognized. Scholars still debate whether ritual or economics played the stronger role in pushing human communities toward large-scale social complexity. Some argue that food surplus and resource management created the foundation for hierarchy. Others point to ritual gatherings, feasting, ancestor memory, and symbolic landscapes as powerful forces that drew people together before strict political systems existed. The useful answer may be less tidy than either side wants. People need bread. Yes, they also need meaning. Bread alone does not explain a temple. Meaning alone does not fill a stomach. You continue through the early settlement as evening gathers. A woman kneels beside a grinding stone, moving her hands in a rhythm learned from others. The sound is low and steady, almost like a dull heartbeat. Nearby, a man shapes clay into a simple vessel. A child watches smoke curl upward and asks where it goes. Nobody writes the answer down. Still, an answer is given. Maybe smoke rises toward ancestors. Maybe it feeds the sky. Maybe it simply disappears. The explanation matters because it teaches the child how to see the world. The physical action becomes a lesson. The lesson becomes an inheritance. The inheritance becomes the unseen architecture of society. This is the world that later myths may compress into divine origin. When Sumerian traditions speak of crafts, cities, offices, and sacred powers being assigned by gods, perhaps they echo a long process in which human communities slowly divided labour and wrapped that division in meaning. The potter, the brewer, the herder, the canal digger, the ritual specialist, the storyteller, the healer, and the keeper of stores all became necessary. Necessity, over time, begins to feel ordained. That word matters, ordained. It means the arrangement no longer feels invented. It feels placed into the world by something greater than argument. This is useful when a society needs stability. It is dangerous when stability becomes unquestionable. Ancient people understood that tension, even if they expressed it through myth instead of theory. You stand near a half-built wall. The bricks are not grand. They are sun-dried, uneven, marked by fingers. Yet they hold a lesson. A wall makes inside and outside. It protects, but it also separates. It creates neighbours and strangers. It gives the living a sense of place, while reminding them that place can be defended, lost, inherited, or cursed. No city exists here yet, but the idea of a city is sleeping. It sleeps in stored grain. It sleeps in repaired walls. It sleeps in shared rituals, remembered burials, controlled water, and the growing conviction that some places matter more than others. It sleeps in the first arguments over who owes labour. It sleeps in the first whispered suspicion that some families have more because the sacred order somehow favours them. You can almost see the Anunnaki waiting far in the distance, not as figures arriving, but as names that will one day be placed over these older structures. Divine rulers make sense only after human societies have learned rule. Divine labour makes sense only after human bodies have been organised into work. Divine cities make sense only after ordinary settlements have taught people to feel that land can be chosen. The sun lowers. The clay walls turn gold. A breeze moves through dry grass beyond the houses, carrying the scent of animals and river mud. Someone closes a rough gate. Someone checks the stored grain. Someone calls a child home. The settlement seems small beneath the sky, almost fragile, almost forgettable. Yet here, in this quiet human arrangement, civilization is already gathering itself. Not as a monument, not as a proclamation, as a habit repeated until it becomes destiny. The ground beneath your imagination becomes harder now. You're no longer only in a small settlement of storage pits and hearth smoke. You're entering the age of larger works, where human hands begin to reshape the land with a confidence that feels almost ceremonial. Walls rise, platforms thicken, ditches cut through soil, reed bundles become roofing, mud bricks dry in the sun, each one carrying the fingerprints of someone history will never name. This is the world of builders without portraits. They do not stand in royal inscriptions. They do not receive hymns. No later scribe pauses to record the ache in their backs or the cracked skin on their palms. Yet they are everywhere. They carry clay. They haul reeds. They press bricks into moulds. They lift baskets of soil. They shape the first spaces where authority can become visible. You can hear them before you see them. Feet slap against damp earth. A basket creaks under weight. Someone coughs in the dust. Someone laughs too loudly because the work is miserable and laughter is cheaper than rest. The air smells of sweat, wet clay, river reeds, and smoke drifting from cooking fires nearby. A child carries water in a small vessel and tries to look more important than he is. He succeeds naturally. Every great structure begins with ordinary bodies. Archaeology confirms that long before the monumental ziggurats of later Mesopotamia, communities in southern Mesopotamia and nearby regions were already constructing substantial buildings, platforms, and communal spaces. Excavations at sites such as Eridu, Uruk, and other early centers reveal long sequences of rebuilding, where one sacred or public structure was placed over another. Research traditions connected with institutions like the University of Chicago, Oxford, and major museum collections have helped show that Mesopotamian architecture grew through repeated effort, not sudden perfection. The past was layered by design. At a place like Eridu, later tradition remembered a city of great antiquity, associated with deep sacred significance. Archaeologists uncovered temple levels built and rebuilt across long periods, each structure resting upon traces of what came earlier. Whether every later myth about Eridu reflects historical reality is another matter, and caution is wise. Still, the physical pattern is powerful. One sacred building rises where another sacred building stood. Continuity becomes architecture. A wall does not only support a roof, it supports memory. A platform does not only lift a room above wet ground, it lifts authority above the daily world. When people climb steps toward a raised building, their bodies learn hierarchy. Below, there is dust, market noise, animals, children, quarrels, and chores. Above, there is controlled space, ritual action, stored wealth, and the feeling that some places require different speech. The building teaches before anyone explains it. You stand near a construction site at dawn, the light is pale, and the workers move like shadows at first. A supervisor measures a line with cord, a group kneads mud with straw, another group brings reed mats. Clay is slapped into molds, turned out and left to dry. The rhythm is simple, but the scale changes everything. One person can make a hut. Many people must make a platform. That difference creates politics. Who decides the plan? Who gathers the labor? Who feeds the workers? Who says this building matters enough to take time from fields, animals, children, and repair work? A structure does not merely appear because people are capable of building it. It appears because someone is convinced, commanded, inspired, obligated, or frightened enough people into agreement. This is where hidden power becomes visible. Before writing records, the names of rulers. Buildings record the presence of organization. They show that labor has been gathered and directed. They show that some idea, sacred or practical, has become important enough to reshape the landscape. Even if the names are lost, the structure remains like a sentence with its subject erased. Built this? You do not know who? That absence is haunting. A quirky tidbit belongs to the humble mud brick. In Mesopotamia, stone was scarce in many southern areas, so people turned mud into architecture with stubborn brilliance. Mud brick sounds fragile, like something a disappointed child might make after rain. Yet, properly shaped, dried, stacked, plastered, and maintained, it could raise temple, walls, houses, and platforms that defined whole cities. Civilization, in a very literal sense, was often baked by the sun, not glamorous, very effective. The builders knew this through practice. They understood how clay behaved, how straw strengthened it, how water could ruin or renew it. They learned where foundations must be thick, where walls needed repair, where drainage mattered. Their knowledge was not abstract. It lived in muscle, habit, and correction. A collapsed wall was a teacher with no patience. The gods later would receive the glory. The builders received the blisters, and yet it would be unfair to imagine them as merely oppressed bodies beneath divine stories. They may have believed deeply in the structures they raised. Work could be exhausting and meaningful at once. A person hauling clay for a shrine might curse the weight and still feel proud when the platform caught the morning light. Human beings are complicated like that. Even now, people complain about projects they secretly love. Ancient people were not simpler. They were simply earlier. Scholars still debate how early temple institutions developed in Mesopotamia. Some see temples as central engines of economic organization, gathering labor, goods, and authority into powerful public households. Others emphasize that later evidence may not perfectly describe earlier phases, where communal ritual, household production, and emerging leadership may have overlapped in ways harder to separate. The uncertainty matters, because the earliest buildings do not come with instruction manuals. They come with flaws, they come with ash, they come with offerings, walls, benches, drains, niches, rebuildings, and traces of use. You move through an early sacred enclosure, not as a tourist, but as someone listening to the architecture. The entrance narrows your body, the floor changes beneath your feet, a wall blocks sight, then reveals an inner space. Light falls from above or through an opening. The air cools. The smell shifts from street dust to plaster, oil, smoke, and stored grain. Someone has placed a vessel carefully near a wall. Nothing happens loudly. That is why it works. Sacred architecture often creates power through control of movement. You cannot wander anywhere. You must turn, wait, enter, approach, stop. The building trains your body to accept sequence. Over generations, sequence becomes ritual. Ritual becomes truth. Truth becomes something that feels older than the building itself. This may be one way later gods inherited earlier human experiments. Imagine a raised platform first built to stay above floodwater. Then imagine gatherings held there during difficult seasons. Then imagine offerings placed there because survival seemed tied to that height. Then imagine elders, specialists, and leaders controlling access. Then imagine stories explaining why the place was chosen. After enough generations, the practical origin is no longer remembered. The platform is sacred because it has always been sacred. The Anunnaki do not need to create that pattern. They can step into it, or rather human imagination can place them there, giving divine names to structures already charged with social force. A temple becomes a house of a god. A storehouse becomes divine property. A work crew becomes sacred labor. An old platform becomes the point where heaven and earth meet. The earlier human system is not erased. It is crowned. That is the hidden transformation. You walk farther, toward a canal being cleared by men and women standing knee-deep in mud. The smell is stronger here, wet and sour, with insects hovering in little clouds. Canal work is less romantic than temple building, but perhaps even more important. Water is survival, water is danger, water makes fields possible, but it also demands constant attention. Silt gathers, banks collapse, channels shift, neglect becomes hunger. A canal is a promise that must be repaired. Records from later Mesopotamia show how central irrigation became to agricultural life, administration, and political power. Yet the earliest experiments in managing water likely grew through local experience across long periods. You can feel the connection forming. Whoever organizes water can influence food. Whoever influences food can influence labor. Whoever influences labor can build. Whoever builds can claim the favor of the unseen. The chain is quiet but strong. The zero civilization, if understood as an older layer of order, may live most clearly in this chain. It is not hidden under one mound. It is hidden inside repeated acts of coordination. Build here, dig there, carry this, store that, gather now, wait until the moon changes, bring offerings before the water rises, repair the bank before the field dies. These commands may have existed before kings. They may have prepared the mind for kings. Night approaches the work site. The bricks darken from gold to brown. Tools are set aside. Workers rinse mud from their legs in shallow water. The raised building stands unfinished, its outline blunt against the fading sky. It is not yet beautiful. It is not yet ancient. It is simply there, made by people who may never be remembered individually, though their labour will shape everything that follows. The builders without names leave no speeches, but their work speaks anyway. It says that civilization is not born first in myth. It is born in carried weight, measured space, shared exhaustion, and the strange human decision to make certain places matter more than others. Later, the gods will occupy those places. Later, scribes will explain them. Later, kings will boast about restoring them. But the first builders have already gone home. Their footprints dry in the clay, and the platform waits beneath the stars. For a moment, the night sky becomes the oldest machine. Not a machine of metal, gears, smoke, or polished wheels, but a vast turning order of light and darkness. The stars return. The moon changes shape. The sun travels through the year with a patience that makes human lives feel brief. Long before people build towers high enough to impress distant travellers, they're already looking upward, measuring fear by rhythm. You stand outside a settlement after sunset. The air is cooler now, and the ground releases the heat it carried all day. Smoke from cooking fires hangs low, mixed with the scent of crushed herbs, animal dung fuel, and river dampness. A child points at the moon. An elder answers with a story, or perhaps with a warning. Somewhere behind you, a dog barks at nothing, which is one of the oldest scientific instruments known to humanity. Very reliable, obviously, above you. The sky is not decoration. It is a calendar. It is a memory board. It is a clock before clocks, a record before writing, and a frightening reminder that human life depends on patterns it cannot control. If the rains come late, people suffer. If the flood rises badly, fields drown. If heat lingers too long, grain fails. So the sky is watched with care because the sky seems to before the earth does. This is where time becomes structure. Mainstream archaeology and the history of science confirm that ancient Mesopotamian societies later developed sophisticated systems of astronomical observation, mathematics, calendars, and Omen traditions. Scholars from institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have studied cuneiform tablets, showing that later Mesopotamian scribes tracked lunar cycles, planetary movements, eclipses, and seasonal patterns with extraordinary seriousness. These later achievements did not appear from nothing. They grew from a much older habit of watching. Watching is not passive, it is labour. You imagine someone rising before dawn, not because a temple bell demands it yet, but because the horizon matters. A certain star appears low in the east. Birds shift in the reeds. The air has a different taste. The observer remembers that this sign came near a seasonal change when she was a child. She tells someone else disagrees. Memory is compared. Pattern becomes argument. Argument becomes knowledge. Over time, knowledge becomes authority. The person who remembers the sky may become important. The person who predicts the season may be trusted, feared, or blamed. If a flood comes as expected, the watcher gains power. If it fails, the watcher may suddenly discover that society has limited patience for inaccurate cosmic services. Ancient life was spiritual, yes, but it was also practical in a way that could ruin your evening. The earliest systems of time probably began with repeated needs. When should seeds be placed in soil? When should animals be moved? When should a gathering happen? When should the dead be honoured? When should a canal be cleared? When should stored grain be opened? These questions are not abstract. They decide hunger, work, marriage, travel, ritual, and survival. A calendar is a social agreement with the sky. Once a group accepts a shared calendar, life changes. Labour can be coordinated. Rituals can be repeated. Debts can be remembered. Festivals can return. Authority can say, not today, but on the appointed day. This small phrase is powerful. The appointed day turns time into obligation. That is a quiet revolution. Before written law, there is scheduled expectation. Before royal decree, there is the season everyone recognizes, and before divine command, there is the returning moon. In this sense, time itself becomes one of the earliest rulers. You can feel that rule as the settlement sleeps. A woman ties a cord with knots to remember days until a gathering. A man marks a post after each moon. Children learn that some nights are ordinary and others are not. On certain nights, food is prepared differently. On certain mornings, people avoid work until an offering is made. On certain days, stories are told because the world is thought to be thin between the living and the unseen. The calendar becomes emotional. It does not merely count time, it gives time meaning. A quirky or fringe tidbit floats at the edge of this subject. Some alternative writers love to imagine that every ancient alignment proves a vanished master civilization with impossible knowledge. A doorway faces sunrise, and suddenly everyone is invited to panic politely. The calmer truth is more interesting. Ancient people were careful observers. They could align buildings, track shadows, and notice celestial cycles without needing lasers, aliens, or a subscription plan from the stars. Still, the fascination is understandable. When an ancient structure faces a significant sunrise, or when a temple layout seems connected to cosmic order, you feel the same pull they may have felt. Stone and sky begin to speak together. The ground no longer feels random. The settlement becomes part of a larger pattern. People can stand in one place and believe the universe has answered them. That belief is powerful enough to organize labor. It is powerful enough to shape architecture. It is powerful enough to become myth. Scholars still debate how far back formal astronomical knowledge can be traced before written records. Some argue that later Mesopotamian mathematical astronomy belongs to a literate scholarly world and should not be pushed too deeply into prehistory. Others note that careful sky watching, your horizon marking, your lunar awareness, and seasonal observation are far older human practices. The debate is not whether ancient people looked up. They certainly did. The question is when watching became a system. You stand inside that question. The night deepens. The stars seem closer than they should. Without modern light, the sky is not a gentle ceiling. It is crowded, sharp, and alive with points of fire. The Milky Way spreads like pale dust across darkness. The moon, if present, changes the whole mood of the land. If absent, the earth feels larger and more uncertain. Small wonder people built stories upward. The hidden timeline now reveals another layer. First, people return to places. Then they store food, bury ancestors, and organize work. Then they begin to bind those actions to repeated celestial signs. A ritual is no longer simply done when people feel moved. It is done when the moon says the time has come. A gathering is no longer merely convenient, it belongs to the season. Work is not only necessary, it is timed. Order becomes cosmic. This is one of the seeds from which later divine systems grow. In Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, gods are not random spirits drifting wherever they please. They are attached to offices, cities, powers, destinies, and cosmic functions. The universe is imagined almost like a great administration, with roles assigned and boundaries guarded. Such a vision makes sense in a society that already understands schedules, duties, ledgers, and appointed times. But perhaps the emotional root is older. People feared disorder because disorder killed. Flood at the wrong time, drought at the wrong time, birth at the wrong time, migration at the wrong time, work delayed too long, ritual neglected too often. The world could not be controlled, but it could be watched. Watching did not remove fear, but it gave fear a rhythm. That rhythm may be one of the oldest forms of comfort. You listen to sandals scrape on packed earth. A figure moves toward the edge of the settlement and lifts his face toward the sky. He is not a scientist in the modern sense. He is not yet a priest in the later temple sense. He's something more fragile and more original, a watcher, a rememberer, a person trusted to notice when the heavens repeat themselves. His knowledge lives in his body. It lives in the angle of his neck. It lives in the patience of waiting. One night, a particular star rises just before dawn. Another season begins. People prepare. Work changes. Food is moved. A story is spoken. The watcher is praised or simply obeyed. No tablet records this for success. No king rewards it. Yet civilization has taken another step, because now a community has linked human action to celestial recurrence. Time has become a tool. A tool can become a weapon. Whoever controls the calendar may control labour. Whoever names the proper day may control ritual. Whoever reads the sky may speak for powers beyond argument. Later, temples will refine this authority. Scribes will calculate and record. Omen experts will interpret strange events. Kings will seek favourable signs before action. The sky will become part of governance. But beneath those formal systems lies the older night. A family watching the moon. A worker counting days by scars of light. A community waiting for the season to turn. Perhaps this, too, belongs to the Zero civilization. Not a hidden dynasty, but an earlier machinery of meaning, built from sky, memory, fear, and repetition. It is the machine that teaches humans to think in cycles before they think in history. It tells them that time is not empty. It arrives with obligations. The fire burns low. The insects quiet for a while, then resume their thin chorus. Above the plain, the stars turn without hurry. They do not explain themselves. They do not care whether anyone understands them. Yet below, human beings begin to build their lives around the hope that the sky can be read. And once the sky can be read, the world is no longer only lived, it is interpreted. Your attention lowers from the stars to the ground. The sky is taught rhythm, but the earth teaches nearness. Beneath your feet are places touched so often by human fear and hope that they begin to feel different from ordinary soil. A cleared circle beside a settlement, a mound where the dead are remembered, a small building with a floor swept more carefully than others, a doorway where smoke has darkened the roof beams across many seasons. This is where sacred order begins to gather, not as a finished religion, not as a temple system with ranks, titles, and official duties. It begins more quietly, with repeated attention. People return to one place instead of another. They leave food there. They pour liquid into the dust. They whisper names. They bring bones, beads, shells, carved stones, or little vessels no bigger than a cupped hand. The place becomes charged. You can feel it when you enter. The air changes because people behave differently here. Voices drop. Children are pulled closer. The careless joke dies before it becomes sound. Even the person who claims not to be afraid steps more carefully. Sacred space does not need marble to work. It only needs a boundary that everyone agrees not to cross casually. A mainstream fact helps anchor this atmosphere. Archaeologists studying prehistoric and early historic communities across the Near East have found ritual buildings, special burials, figurines, offerings, plastered surfaces, and carefully arranged spaces. Scholars associated with Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have explored how ritual life may have helped organize communities long before later Mesopotamian temples dominated public life. Ritual is not decoration, it is social technology. That phrase may sound modern, but the idea is simple. Ritual teaches people how to act together. It makes grief public. It makes fear shareable. It turns uncertainty into sequence. When everyone knows what must be done after a death, during a drought, before a journey, or at the start of a season, society becomes easier to hold together. Not easy, just less likely to split apart at every sorrow. You walk toward a small shrine at evening. The floor is packed clay, smoother than the ground outside. The wall has been repaired many times. A niche holds a vessel darkened by smoke. Someone has placed reeds there, tied with cord. The smell is a mixture of ash, oil, damp earth, and something herbal crushed underfoot. It is not grand. It is intimate. That intimacy matters. Before palaces, before royal courts, before written prayers, human beings create spaces where the invisible can be addressed. They do not always agree on what the invisible is. Ancestors, spirits, powers of place, forces of fertility, dangerous dead, helpful dead, animals with symbolic force, the sky, the river, the storm. The names shift. The need remains. People need somewhere to place what cannot be solved. A lost child, a failed harvest, a dream that feels too vivid, a sickness that arrives without warning, a flood that takes one house and spares another. These experiences demand explanation because randomness is hard for the human heart to carry. Sacred order gives suffering a structure, even when that structure is frightening. Perhaps especially then, a quirky tidbit belongs to ancient figurines. Small human and animal forms have been found across many early sites, and modern interpreters have sometimes treated them as goddesses, toys, charms, teaching objects, offerings, or household symbols. In other words, the scholarly label may depend partly on who is looking and how confident they feel before coffee. One tiny clay figure can create a very large academic argument. That is oddly comforting. It shows how difficult sacred life is to reconstruct. A broken figurine does not come with a polite note explaining its purpose. A pit full of ash may be ritual, domestic, industrial, or several things at once. A burial beneath a floor may express love, control, lineage, fear, or the simple desire to keep the dead close. Ancient life rarely separates categories as neatly as modern people prefer. The sacred and practical often share the same room. That is one reason the earlier sacred order is so important. It does not float above daily life. It grows inside it. A house can be a ritual place. A hearth can be a memory center. A storage vessel can hold food and meaning. A wall painting, a skull, a bead, or a carefully placed stone can mark a relationship between the living and the unseen. Later temples will make sacred power public and monumental, but first, sacred power is domestic. You see a family gathered near a low platform. A woman places a small portion of food where others have placed food before. A man touches the wall lightly, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of reverence. An older child watches closely because one day the gesture will belong to him. Nobody explains everything. They do not need to. The meaning is carried by repetition. This is how sacred order trains memory. The gesture tells the body what the mind may not fully understand. Bow here, wait here, pour here, speak softly here, do not eat this portion, do not step over that line. These rules create a world within the world, and that inner world can survive long after the original reasons fade. Scholars still debate whether early ritual spaces should be interpreted mainly as religious, social, political, or economic institutions. Some emphasize belief and symbolism. Others stress feasting, alliance building, food redistribution, and leadership. A careful view allows these meanings to overlap. Ancient people did not have to choose between feeding a crowd and honoring a power. The same event could do both. A feast can be devotion. A gift can be politics. A shrine can be memory, authority, and storage all at once. The hidden timeline now gains another layer. People return to places. They measure seasons. They organize work. Then they mark certain spaces as different, places where human action is watched by the unseen. Once that idea takes hold, society changes. Authority can claim sacred support. Labour can be offered and not merely demanded. Food can become tribute. A leader can become a ritual specialist. A ritual specialist can become a gatekeeper. The gate matters, even if it is only symbolic. Who enters first? Who speaks? Who touches the vessel? Who receives the offering afterward? Who remembers the correct words? These small differences become large over time. Sacred order does not only comfort people, it can also rank them. You feel the tension in the room. The shrine is warm with firelight, but the rules around it are cool and firm. A young person wants to approach too soon and is stopped by a glance. An outsider stands near the edge, unsure where to place his feet. An elder knows the sequence and therefore holds quiet power. This is not yet the great temple bureaucracy of Sumer, but the seed is present. Every institution begins as a repeated permission. This helps explain how later divine systems could become so elaborate. When Sumerian religion describes gods with houses, offerings, servants, property, and daily care, it may preserve the expanded form of much older habits, feeding the unseen, housing the sacred, timing rituals, assigning roles, protecting special places, turning memory into obligation. The Anunnaki, when they appear in later mythic order, enter a world already trained to imagine hierarchy. The divine assembly makes sense because human assemblies already exist. Divine rank makes sense because sacred rank has been felt in rooms like this. Divine command makes sense because ritual command has already shaped bodies, meals, seasons, and fears. The first sacred order may not have named them, but it prepared a place for them. Outside, the evening air grows cool. The settlement settles into low sound. Someone repairs a basket near the doorway. Someone carries water carefully because spilling it here would feel wrong. Smoke rises from the shrine opening and disappears into the dark, where stars wait without comment. You pause at the threshold. Behind you is ordinary life, with hunger, jokes, work, irritation, and sleep. Before you is a space made powerful by attention. There is no need for thunder. The quiet is enough. The sacred often begins not when the world becomes loud, but when people agree to lower their voices. And in that lowered voice, civilization learns another lesson. The invisible can organize the visible. A name enters the darkness, but it does not enter first. The Anunnaki arrive in your thoughts like figures seen through temple smoke, solemn, distant, and already surrounded by order. They are not small village spirits. They are not half-remembered ancestors beneath a house floor. In the written world of Mesopotamia, they belong to a larger sacred architecture, a world of divine assemblies, ranked powers, cosmic decisions, and destinies assigned with terrible calm. Yet the more carefully you look, the later they seem. Not late in the way a guest arrives after dinner and apologizes badly. Late in the deeper historical sense. Their names appear within literate cultures that have already built cities, temples, administrative systems, myths, scribal schools, and royal traditions. By the time the Anunnaki become visible in written records, human beings have already spent thousands of years organizing fear, labor, time, sacred space, and authority. This is the unsettling possibility. The Anunnaki may not mark the beginning of sacred order. They may mark its inheritance. You stand now inside a Mesopotamian temple city, though the night still carries echoes of older marshes and village shrines. The streets are narrow. Mud brick walls hold the day's heat. Lamps flicker in doorways. The smell of bread, wool, smoke, and river mud moves between houses. Somewhere above the ordinary noise, a raised sacred platform catches moonlight and turns pale against the sky. The city feels alive, but also watched. In later Sumerian and Akkadian texts, the Anunnaki appear as important divine beings connected with judgment, fate, the underworld in some traditions, and the great order of gods. Their exact roles shift across time, language, and text, which is a polite way of saying ancient theology was not as tidy as a modern chart. Scholars from institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have long studied these texts through cuneiform sources, temple records, myths, and lexical lists. The evidence is real. The meaning is layered. You do not find one single Anunnaki story that explains everything cleanly. Instead, you find a family of traditions. Names change in importance. Divine relationships shift. Local gods rise and fall with cities. Myths are copied, adapted, translated, and interpreted across centuries. A power that is central in one setting may become secondary in another. This does not make the tradition weak. It makes it alive. Living traditions are messy. So are families. The word Anunnaki itself becomes a doorway into complexity. Modern audiences often hear it and imagine one fixed group of mysterious beings, neatly defined and dramatically waiting in the shadows. Ancient texts are less convenient. Sometimes the term refers to a group of gods. Sometimes it overlaps with ideas of high divine status. Sometimes later, traditions connect them with judges of the dead or powers of the netherworld. The category breathes differently depending on context. That flexibility matters. It suggests that the Anunnaki were part of an evolving sacred vocabulary, not a single frozen revelation. Human communities were using divine names to organize relationships between power, place, fear, death, labor, and destiny. The gods carried social meanings. They did not float outside history untouched by it. A mainstream fact helps steady the picture. By the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, Mesopotamian cities possessed complex temple institutions, scribal administration, long-distance exchange, and mythological traditions tied to specific deities and urban centres. Surviving tablets show that divine names were embedded in offerings, festivals, hymns, royal inscriptions, and economic life. Religion was not separate from society. It helped structure society. That is the important point. The Anunnaki enter a world already built for divine administration. You can imagine a temple storeroom at dawn. Jars are sealed, wool is counted, grain is measured, workers wait for rations, a scribe presses signs into clay. A priest or official moves through the room with practiced seriousness. The god is not physically visible, but the institution acts as though divine ownership is real. The grain belongs to the god. The labour serves the god. The offerings feed the god. The city survives beneath divine attention. Now ask softly what came first. Was the god imagined because the temple economy needed sacred authority? Or did the temple economy grow because people already believed the god required care, food, land, and servants? Scholars still debate how deeply economic systems shape theology, and how much belief shaped institutions in return. The most honest answer may be circular. Humans build systems, then systems build humans back. That is very ancient, also mildly inconvenient. A quirky fringe tidbit appears in modern popular culture, where the Anunnaki are sometimes transformed into visitors from another planet, engineers of humanity, or secret rulers behind every stone monument available on the internet. It is an energetic hobby. Certainly. But the older texts themselves are stranger in a quieter way. They do not need spacecraft to disturb you. They already describe a universe where humans exist inside a hierarchy they did not choose. That is haunting enough. The ancient idea that humans serve divine powers may reflect temple economies, social hierarchy, ritual obligation, and mythic attempts to explain hard labour. In some Mesopotamian stories, humans are created or arranged to relieve gods of work. This is not a cheerful anthropology. It is more like someone looked at irrigation maintenance, brick hauling, barley accounting, and tax obligations, then decided the cosmos itself must run on unpaid overtime. There is the gentle sarcasm hiding in the mud. Still, the idea is profound. If humans are workers for the gods, then labour is not merely economic, it is cosmic. Carrying baskets, baking bread, brewing beer, tending animals, clearing canals, and delivering offerings become part of a sacred arrangement. Life is hard not because society is unfair, though it often is, but because the universe has assigned humanity a role. That belief gives suffering meaning. It can also make suffering harder to challenge. Here, the Anunnaki may function as a later divine language for older human experience. Long before their names were written, people had already learned that survival required work beyond personal desire. Water had to be managed, fields had to be maintained, storage had to be guarded, the dead had to be honoured, rituals had to be performed, communities had to coordinate. The individual body belonged to a larger system. Later myth gives that system a divine face. You walk through the temple courtyard. The stone or packed clay beneath your feet is cool in the morning shade. A vessel stands near a doorway. Incense or fragrant smoke drifts lightly from a brazier. Someone carries a basket of offerings, head lowered, steps careful. The city's noise fades at the edge of this space, as if ordinary sound knows not to enter too quickly. Here, hierarchy is felt in the body. You do not need a lecture. Steps rise, doors narrow, officials stand in certain places, offerings move along controlled paths, the god's house receives food while hungry people live nearby, and somehow the arrangement feels not absurd, but necessary. Sacred order has become social reality. This is why the Anunnaki feel late. They depend on a world that has already learned rank. They depend on a world that has already connected labour with obligation, offerings with power, and cosmic order with human obedience. They may be ancient to us, but they are not ancient compared with the first human gesture toward the unseen. They stand above a staircase whose lower steps disappear into prehistory. The hidden timeline becomes more delicate now. First, the dead remain close. Then places become sacred. Then seasons become ritual. Then labour becomes coordinated. Then storage becomes power. Then buildings rise. Then writing records the system. Then gods with offices and assemblies appear in full textual light, as though they had always ruled. Perhaps they had, in memory. But memory is not the same as origin. You pause near a wall covered in shadow. A scribe moves past you, carrying a damp tablet. He may copy a hymn, record an offering, or list goods sent to an institution. He is not thinking about the zero civilization. He is thinking about signs, duties, and perhaps whether the person responsible for barley delivery is making his life unnecessarily difficult. Yet through his work, older patterns survive. He writes a divine name, and behind it stand centuries of ritual practice. He records an offering, and behind it stand older gift placed beside hearths and graves. He copies a myth of divine order, and behind it stand countless unnamed efforts to make hunger, death, flood, and hierarchy understandable. The Anunnaki enter late because writing enters late. The written god is never the first god. The name power is never the first fear. Outside the temple, the sun climbs higher. The mud brick walls glow softly. Workers move through the city, ordinary and indispensable. A child watches them from a doorway, learning without knowing it that some people command, some people carry, some places are sacred, and some names must be spoken carefully. This is how divine order becomes common sense. Not in one moment, in thousands, and perhaps, long before the Anunnaki were pressed into clay, the world had already prepared the questions they would answer. Who controls fate? Why must humans work? Why does the city belong to powers no eye can see? Why do the dead, the sky, the river, and the temple all seem to demand obedience? The Anunnaki did not need to invent those questions. They only had to inherit them. You begin now with the oldest human burden. Work. Not work as a modern schedule. Not work measured by glowing screens, alarms, invoices, or little calendar boxes that multiply while you're trying to have a peaceful life. This is older work, heavier work, the kind that begins when the sky is still grey and the body would rather remain curled beside warmth, the kind that waits in the field, the canal, the storehouse, the animal pen, and the shrine. The ancient world does not ask whether you feel motivated. It has water to move. You stand beside a canal in southern Mesopotamia, where the mud grips ankles and refuses to let go politely. The air is damp near the water, but the sun is already sharpening above the plain. Men and women bend over the channel, clearing silt with baskets, wooden tools, and tired hands. Insects hover over standing pools. The smell is sour, earthy, alive. Somewhere nearby, barley fields depend on this work being finished before the water fails or overwhelms them. This is not background labour. This is survival made repetitive. Mainstream historical research confirms that irrigation, agriculture, temple economies, and organised labour became central to early Mesopotamian society. Scholars from universities such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have studied cuneiform records showing rations, work assignments, fields, herds, offerings, and institutional control of goods. These records come from literate periods, but they reveal something deeply rooted. Complex societies required bodies coordinated across time. A city is a labour arrangement before it's a skyline. That is easy to forget. When people imagine ancient civilization, they often picture golden temples, solemn gods, carved seals, and kings in dramatic profile. They do not always picture the person carrying bricks in heat, the brewer stirring mash, the woman grinding grain until her shoulders ache, the child sent to fetch water, or the canal worker whose legs are caked with mud before breakfast. Yet these people hold the world upright. Without them, gods receive no offerings, temples store no grain, fields dry, animals wander, walls crumble. The city becomes a beautiful idea with no one left to sweep it. This is where humanity's role enters the mystery. In some Mesopotamian creation traditions, human beings are made or arranged to perform work for divine powers. The gods, in these stories, do not want endless labour. They want relief from it. Humanity appears as a solution to a cosmic problem, a workforce created beneath a higher order. It is a severe image, almost darkly practical, as if the universe itself has a management structure and humans are placed firmly on the lower floor. Not exactly flattering, but strangely honest. You can hear the myth forming from the rhythm of work. Baskets lifted, mud carried, grain measured, beer brewed, sheep counted, offerings delivered. The same actions repeat year after year until labour seems less like an arrangement and more like destiny. If everyone must work to support the temple, the ruler, the ancestors, the living and the unseen, then perhaps work is not only social, perhaps it is woven into creation itself. That thought comforts and traps at the same time. It comforts because hardship gains meaning. The ache in your arms belongs to something larger. The bread you bake, the ditch you clear, the wool you spin, the barley you carry, all participate in a sacred order. Even exhaustion can become service. Even ordinary pain can be placed inside a cosmic story. But it traps because sacred stories can make human systems seem untouchable. If labour is demanded by gods, who dares question the demand? This is one of the quiet tensions in ancient religion. It can dignify daily work, but it can also justify hierarchy. It can make the lowly person feel seen by the divine, yet also make the lowly person accept a burden arranged by other humans. The same myth can hold comfort in one hand and control in the other. You feel that tension by the canal. A supervisor stands on firmer ground, watching the line of workers. He's not necessarily cruel. Perhaps he's tired too. Perhaps he answers to someone above him. Above that person is another office, another authority, another temple household, another royal command, another divine name. The chain rises until responsibility disappears into the sky. That is very convenient, also very old. A quirky detail from Mesopotamian economic life is that beer often appears in ration systems, not as a party favour, but as a regular part of diet and compensation. Ancient work crews might receive grain, oil, wool, or beer, depending on context. So yes, somewhere in the deep roots of bureaucracy, someone was essentially keeping track of who got their beer allowance. Humanity may not have invented happiness, but it certainly documented barley. The humour is small, but it matters. It reminds you that ancient labourers were not symbols. They were living people. They had thirst, jokes, grudges, sore knees, favourite foods, and probably strong opinions about supervisors. They were not merely servants of gods or victims of hierarchy. They were families, neighbours, skilled workers, singers, mourners, and storytellers moving through systems larger than themselves. The Zero civilization, if imagined as an older layer of order, may have prepared this view of humanity long before it reached written myth. Early communities needed shared labour to survive. They needed people to dig, build, gather, store, guard, repair, and remember. Over time, the group learned that individual desire had to bend before collective necessity. The field did not care if someone felt inspired. The canal did not wait for personal growth. Water must be moved. Food must be stored. The dead must be honoured. Such repeated duties could become the emotional basis for later myths of human purpose. Before someone wrote that people were created to serve gods, countless generations had already lived as though survival itself required service. Service to kin, service to place, service to season, service to ancestors, service to the fragile structure that kept hunger away for one more year. When gods enter that structure, they do not create duty from nothing. They sanctify it. Scholars still debate how Mesopotamian creation myths relate to real social conditions. Some interpret human creation for divine labour as a reflection of temple economies and organised work in early states. Others warn that myths operate symbolically and should not be reduced to economic commentary. A balanced reading lets both ideas breathe. Myth is not a wage record, but it can reveal how a society imagines its burdens, and Mesopotamia imagined burdens with unusual clarity. You walk now toward a field where workers cut barley under a pale sky. The stalks whisper as they move. Hands gather, bind, lift, and carry. Dust sticks to sweat. A child brings a clay cup of water to an older woman who drinks slowly and returns to cutting. No one in this field is thinking in grand theories of civilization. They are thinking about weather, hunger, family, soreness, and the hope that the harvest will be enough. Yet this field is also a sacred theatre. Grain feeds the living, grain feeds animals. Grain becomes bear, grain becomes offerings, grain becomes tax, rent, ration, wealth, and obligation. Grain moves through houses, temples, storehouses, and palaces. The smaller seed enters the larger system. Perhaps that is why ancient society treated fertility with such reverence. A field that produces is not merely useful, it feels blessed. A field that fails is not merely unfortunate, it feels accused. Between those feelings grows ritual, and between ritual and labour grows a bond that later gods can easily claim. You see a woman place a small portion of grain aside before the rest is carried away. She may do it for a household power, an ancestor, a temple expectation, or simply because this is what has always been done. The gesture is modest, almost invisible, yet it says something profound. Not all food belongs only to the eater. Some part must move toward the unseen. There is humanity's role again, to feed what cannot feed itself, to remember what cannot speak, to maintain what would collapse without hands. The Anunnaki, in later imagination, stand above this arrangement as powers of decision and destiny, but the arrangement itself may reach into older human experience. People did not need a full divine assembly to know they were obligated. They had obligations before the names. Myth later gave those obligations a cosmic sealing. Your body in this imagined world feels the weight of it. The basket strap bites your shoulder. The mud pulls at your feet. The sun presses against your back. The work is not heroic. It simply continues. That continuation is the foundation of everything. Kings may boast, scribes may record, priests may chant, gods may receive. But if the worker stops, the sacred order becomes hungry very quickly. There is an almost dangerous truth there. The lowest bodies support the highest ideas. Ancient myths often place humans beneath gods, but archaeology keeps showing the opposite material fact. Human hands built the houses of gods. Human grain fed divine statues through ritual meals. Human labour maintained canals, fields, walls, and storerooms. The gods may have owned the city in imagination, but humans kept the city alive in mud and sweat. This does not destroy the myth, it deepens it, because perhaps ancient people sensed the contradiction. They knew they served the gods, yet they also knew the gods depended on service. They knew humans were small, yet without humans the divine house stood empty. That tension may be one reason Mesopotamian religion feels so powerful. It does not pretend life is gentle. It turns dependence, fear, and labour into theology. Even the divine order needs maintenance. You pause at the edge of the field as evening begins to soften the heat. The workers move more slowly now. The canal glints in the distance. Smoke rises from cooking fires near the settlement. Someone laughs, not because life is easy, but because people laugh anyway. A dog circles hopefully near a basket, pursuing its own sacred calling with great focus. The day ends, but work does not vanish. It waits for morning, and as the sky darkens, you begin to understand that humanity's role in the ancient imagination may have grown from the deepest fact of settled life. To live together is to owe something. To survive is to work. To remember the dead is to serve them. To feed the gods is to feed the system that explains why the burden exists. Perhaps humans were not created for labour in any literal sense. Perhaps labour created the story of humans, and perhaps, somewhere beneath the Anunnaki, beneath the temples, beneath the clay tablets and the royal lists, the Zero civilization was already teaching this difficult lesson. A society becomes stable when people believe their work belongs to more than themselves. A society becomes powerful when that belief can be organised. The night grows calm over the fields. The tools rest beside the wall. Your hands still remember the weight. The sound changes first. Not the sky, not the temple, not the distant voice of a priest, but the low movement of water where water should not be moving. It begins as a murmur beyond the houses. Then it becomes a rush through reeds. Then a thick, heavy breathing over the plain, as if the river has turned in its sleep and forgotten the shape of its banks. You stand near the edge of a settlement under a darkening sky. The air smells metallic, wet and anxious. Animals shift in their pens. Dogs bark toward the river. A child wakes and begins to cry because adults are moving too quickly. Baskets are lifted. Grain jars are dragged toward the higher ground. Someone shouts for a brother. Someone else cannot find a goat. And somehow the goat has chosen this exact historical moment to become philosophical. The water keeps coming. In Mesopotamia, rivers were blessing and threat together. The Tigris and Euphrates made agriculture possible, but their floods could also arrive unpredictably, changing channels, drowning fields, damaging settlements, and leaving layers of silt over human plans. Archaeological work across southern Mesopotamia has identified flood deposits at some ancient sites. Though scholars debate how local or widespread particular events were, research traditions connected with institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have treated flood evidence carefully, because mud can tell a story, but not always the story people want. That caution matters. Still, the memory of disaster is real. You watch water enter the lower storage area. It does not crash in like a theatrical wave. It slides, spreads, thickens, and claims. First the floor darkens, then baskets tilt. Then a small vessel floats free and knocks gently against a wall. That soft knock is worse than thunder. It means order has been broken. A flood does not need anger to terrify. It only needs patience. People move through mud with arms full of whatever they can save. A sleeping mat, a jar of seed grain, a bundle of tools, a child wrapped in wool, a small object from a shrine, a skull fragment, perhaps, or a vessel that belongs to the ancestors. Practical and sacred things become mixed in the panic, because when water rises, the categories of life do not remain neat. You save what makes tomorrow possible. You save what makes yesterday bearable. This is where flood stories begin to breathe, not necessarily as exact reports, not as simple newspapers from prehistory. They begin as emotional compression, as communities remembering that water once came too far, too fast, or too strangely. The event may have been local, regional, repeated, exaggerated, ritualized, and retold until it became cosmic. But the fear beneath it is not imaginary. Ancient Mesopotamian literature preserves powerful flood traditions, including stories in Sumerian and Akkadian sources where divine decisions, human survival, boats, animals, and renewed life appear in different forms. These narratives later influenced wider Near Eastern traditions. The written versions are literary and theological, shaped by scribes and cultures across time. Yet they may also rest upon memories of real riverine danger in a land where water was both life and judgment. The river feeds you. The river can erase you. That double nature makes it sacred. A quirky tidbit hides inside ancient flood thinking. In some versions of the Mesopotamian flood tradition, the gods are disturbed by human noise, which is an oddly relatable complaint if you have ever lived near enthusiastic neighbours. The universe, apparently, may tolerate many things, but not endless human commotion. It is a dark little joke inside a serious myth. Civilization becomes loud enough that even heaven wants a quiet evening. Yet the deeper meaning is not comic. Noise represents excess, crowding, disturbance, and the anxiety of human multiplication. The flood becomes a reset, a terrifying answer to imbalance. A society that lives with unpredictable water can easily imagine catastrophe as punishment, correction, or divine decision. Disaster seeks explanation because suffering without explanation feels unbearable. You climb with others toward higher ground. The mud sucks at your feet, rain stings your face, a basket slips, and grain scatters into brown water. Someone curses, then remembers the sacred place and lowers his voice, as if manners still matter when the world is dissolving. A woman presses a child against her chest and looks back at the roofs below. Firelight flickers inside one house until the water reaches it. Then darkness. A whole life can vanish in a few breaths. The flooded layer is not only geological, it is emotional. It settles inside stories, rituals, place names, warnings, and family memory. Long after the water recedes, people point to a line on a wall. They speak of the year the river entered the sleeping room. They remember who survived because they listened, and who did not because they laughed at the warning. Memory becomes instruction. Instruction becomes myth. In archaeological terms, flood deposits can be difficult to interpret. A layer of silt may mark a local flood, a channel shift, a seasonal event, or a more destructive episode. Scholars still debate how specific ancient flood layers relate to later literary traditions, and many caution against connecting one mud deposit too quickly to one grand story. Others argue that repeated environmental shocks could have shaped a shared cultural imagination of deluge, loss, and renewal. Both positions keep you honest. One protects the evidence. The other respects memory. Zero civilization, if it exists as an older layer of human order, would have been shaped by such shocks. Before writing, before royal lists, before divine assemblies, communities learned that their world could be overturned by water. A settlement might prepare for years, then lose stores in one season. A sacred place might be buried. A burial ground might vanish under silt. A familiar path might become a channel. After such events, the past is not gone. It is buried under mud. You see people returning after the waters fall. The smell is heavy, rotten, fertile, and sad. Fish lie in places where fish should not be. Walls have softened and slumped. Stored grain has spoiled. Tools are missing. The ground is coated in new earth, smooth and indifferent. Children poke at the mud until someone tells them to stop. Adults stand quietly because grief has too many tasks. Then rebuilding begins. This is the strange mercy of floodplains. The same silt that buries can enrich. A ruined field may one day grow again. A broken house may be rebuilt on a higher platform. A shrine may be repaired, or covered, or moved. A community may decide that survival proves divine favour, or that destruction proves divine anger, or simply that the river must be watched more carefully. Out of disaster comes design. Platforms rise higher, storage improves, rituals become sharper, seasonal warnings gain authority. The person who predicted danger is remembered. The person who ignored it becomes a cautionary tale, which is a very ancient form of social media, only with fewer comments and more consequences. You can feel how disaster strengthens sacred order. If water can erase human plans, then humans seek powers greater than water. They promise offerings. They tell stories of chosen survivors. They imagine gods debating destruction and mercy. They create rituals to prevent repetition, or at least to feel less helpless before it. They mark high ground as special. They teach children where to run. A flood makes memory urgent. This urgency may explain why ancient flood stories carry such force. They are not only about death, they are about continuity. Who is allowed to survive? What is saved? What must be rebuilt? Which animals, seeds, tools, rites, and names cross from the old world into the new? A flood story is a civilization asking whether anything can endure when the ground itself betrays trust. That question reaches far beneath Sumer. It reaches into every community that feared losing the world overnight. The Anunnaki and other divine powers, in later traditions, appear within a cosmos where destruction can be decided, delayed, regretted, or survived through special knowledge. But the emotional root may be older than those names. It lies in the experience of watching water enter the place where children sleep. It lies in carrying seed grain uphill. It lies in returning to find a familiar doorway filled with mud. The flooded layer becomes a boundary. Before the water, after the water. This is how time splits. Later scribes would speak of ages before and after great catastrophe. Kings before the flood, kings after the flood, cities whose authority passes from one place to another. Whether these lists preserve history, theology, politics, or all three, they reveal a mind trained to imagine disaster as a hinge. The world turns on it. Memory reorganizes around it. You sit now on higher ground under a clearing sky. The rain has thinned. The river below glimmers in the first grey light. People huddle around small fires, wet, exhausted, and awake in that hollow way disaster creates. No one has the strength for grand speeches. A child sleeps against a sack of rescued grain. An old man holds a broken object from the shrine and stares at it, as if it might explain everything. It does not, but it remains. Perhaps that is enough for mourning. The mystery of the zero civilization grows deeper in this wet silence. If older communities were repeatedly struck by flood, drought, and shifting rivers, then their systems of meaning may have been born from recovery as much as from invention. Civilization may not begin only when people build. It may begin when people rebuild, and then remember why rebuilding matters. The water falls, the mud dries, a new layer forms over the old ground, and somewhere beneath that layer, an earlier world becomes harder to reach. Not because it never existed, but because the river has folded it into silence. The floodwater withdraws, and time becomes strange, not merely wet or broken, not simply marked by ruined walls and silted fields, but stretched into something almost unbearable. People begin to speak of what happened in two voices. There is the ordinary voice, the one that says the river rose, the stores were lost, the houses fell, and the fields must be cleared. Then there is the deeper voice, the one that says the world itself ended, and somehow began again. That second voice is the one myth remembers. You stand in a settlement where the mud has dried into pale crusts along doorways. The air smells of damp brick, spoiled grain, smoke, and new grass forcing itself through debris. A woman scrapes silt from a threshold. A man lifts a broken beam. Children search for small lost things, because children understand grief through objects before they understand history. Someone speaks of the old rulers, not the rulers anyone living has seen. Older rulers, larger rulers, kings who belonged to the time before the Great Water, when the world was different, when cities had names that sound heavy in the mouth, when authority seemed closer to heaven and farther from ordinary human weakness. This is how the kings before history enter the room. The Sumerian king list preserves one of the most mysterious royal sequences from ancient Mesopotamia. In its surviving forms, kingship descends from heaven, settles in early cities, and passes through rulers whose reigns last impossibly long before a flood interrupts the order. Scholars associated with major university collections and cuneiform studies at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have examined these lists as political, literary, and theological documents rather than simple chronicles. That distinction matters. A king who reigns for 28,800 years is not asking to be read like a tax receipt. He is doing something else in the ancient imagination. He is stretching authority beyond normal time. He is telling you that political power did not begin with ordinary men arguing over land. It began in a sacred age, under conditions modern minds can barely enter. The numbers are enormous, almost sleepy in their vastness. You let them pass through your thoughts like stars reflected in floodwater. 8 kings, 5 cities, reigns measured not in decades, but in spans that make human life feel like a breath against a wall. The list does not behave like modern history. It behaves like a bridge between mythic time and human time, between an age when kingship is cosmic and an age when kings become mortal enough to be named, fought, praised, and buried. A quirky tidbit rests inside these giant reigns. Some scholars note that Mesopotamian numerical systems used bases and units that can make ancient large numbers feel mathematically elegant, even when they are historically impossible. In other words, the numbers may not be random exaggeration shouted across a tavern. They may belong to a learned numerical imagination. Ancient scribes could be mystical and very organized at the same time. That is a dangerous combination. The list creates a pattern. Kingship comes down. Cities receive it. Rulers hold it. A flood interrupts it. Then kingship resumes. This is not only a sequence of names, it is a theory of civilization. Order is not invented by humans from below. It descends from above, moves across chosen places, survives catastrophe, and reappears in changed form. You can feel why this would be powerful. After a disaster, people need more than repair. They need continuity. They need to believe the world has not become meaningless. A list of ancient kings, even impossible kings, offers a kind of reassurance. It says that order existed before the break, and order can exist after it. The flood is terrible, but it is not final. The story continues because kingship returns. You walk through an early city archive in imagination, where tablets rest in baskets and on shelves. The light is low, the room smells of clay dust, oil smoke, and old reeds. A scribe bends over a tablet, copying a line from an older source. He may not know where the first version came from. He may not need to know. The act of copying gives the past another body. His hand moves carefully. One error could annoy eternity. The kings before history are not only individuals, they are containers for memory. Each name gathers a city, a claim, a divine association, a political purpose, and perhaps a trace of older tradition. Later dynasties could use such lists to place themselves inside a grand order. If kingship had passed through many cities before, then present authority could be framed as part of a cosmic rotation, rather than mere ambition. This is clever. It is also deeply human. People rarely want power to look accidental. They want it to look inherited, chosen, necessary, ancient, and preferably approved by forces nobody can argue with at dinner. The king list gives power a deep past. It makes history feel arranged rather than improvised. Scholars still debate how much historical memory lies behind the earliest names in the list. Some rulers and cities may reflect real traditions, while the impossible lifespans clearly belong to mythic or symbolic time. Some scholars read the list as royal propaganda, while others emphasize its role in organizing cultural memory after catastrophe. A careful listener does not force one answer. The tablet is doing many things at once. It is memory. It is theology. It is politics. It is a map of legitimacy. The hidden timeline grows more intricate here. Before the Anunnaki become prominent in later divine systems, before temple mythologies take their fuller written shapes, people already imagine that rule has a sacred origin. The oldest kings are not merely strong men. They are figures at the edge of the human and the cosmic. Their reigns are too long because ordinary time cannot hold them. Perhaps that is the point. Mythic time is not broken history. It is a different kind of truth-making. It tells a society how far back its order wants to reach. When a culture places its first kings before a flood, it is not only remembering rulers, it is saying that authority itself survived the death of a world. You stand near a wall where drying tablets wait. Outside, the city carries on. Bakers slap dough against hot surfaces. Potters turn vessels. Donkeys complain with impressive commitment. Workers carry loads through streets that smell of straw, smoke, and human closeness. The sacred list exists in this very practical world. That contrast makes it stronger. Grant time an ordinary time touch. Ascribe rights of kings who ruled for thousands of years, then perhaps goes home to worry about dinner. Ancient minds could hold cosmic scale and daily irritation without trouble. Maybe modern minds are the ones that have become too tidy. The kings before history also suggest something about the zero civilization. If later Mesopotamians imagined an age before the flood as organized by cities and kingship, they may have been projecting familiar institutions backward into mythic darkness. But projection is still meaningful. It shows what they believed must exist for the world to be understandable. City, ruler, descent from heaven, catastrophe, restoration. These are not random pieces. They are the bones of order. Perhaps older communities, living before writing, preserved memories of powerful places, ancestral leaders, ritual specialists, and disaster survivors. Over centuries, those memories may have expanded, fused, and transformed. A respected ancestor becomes a king. A local flood becomes the flood. A remembered settlement becomes a city before history. A practical leader becomes a ruler appointed by heaven. This is not deception. This is memory dreaming in public. You feel the sleepiness of those vast reigns now, not because they are dull, but because they are too large to resist. The mind cannot picture 20,000 years of one king. It drifts instead. It sees a throne in a city of mist. It sees water beyond the gates. It sees a ruler whose face is never clear. It hears names copied across time until their original owners disappear behind the sound of authority. That fading is part of the spell. The Anunnaki, in later thought, belong to a universe where divine councils and cosmic decisions shape human destiny. But these pre-flood kings already prepare that universe. They place rule in a sacred timeline. They make politics older than politics. They make the city a vessel of heaven, not merely a gathering of walls and workers. And so the story of what came before the Anunnaki becomes stranger again. Perhaps before them stood not another named race of gods, but a memory of authority so old that humans could only describe it through impossible kings. Perhaps the zero civilization survives here as a list that cannot be believed literally, yet cannot be dismissed easily. It is too structured to be nonsense, too impossible to be ordinary history. You set the tablet back in shadow. The names remain. They hover like lamps seen through river mist, marking a road from sacred time into recorded time. You do not know who first spoke them. You do not know what memories they replaced. You only know that ancient people wanted a beginning older than evidence, older than living memory, older even than the flood that split the world. And in that longing for an older beginning, the kings before history still reign. The city darkens, and your attention rises again, above the roofs, above the temple platform, above the restless dogs and quiet courtyards. The sky opens like a second archive. It has no clay shelves, no reed stylus, no sealed jars, no scribal students ruining their exercises with sleepy hands. Yet it preserves a kind of record that ancient people learned to read with astonishing patience. The stars return to their places, the moon changes, then returns. Planets wander with strange intention, bright and calm, as if they know a road invisible to everyone below. To modern eyes they are worlds, to ancient observers They were signs, powers, messengers, mysteries, and sometimes trouble wearing a beautiful face. You stand on a flat roof in Mesopotamia after midnight. The air is cooler, carrying the faint smell of ashes, wool, river dampness, and stored grain. A low wall presses against your knees. Somewhere below, a child coughs in sleep. A donkey shifts near a courtyard. Farther away, water moves through a canal with a soft, steady sound, but above you everything feels awake. The sky is crowded. This is not decorative darkness. It is a field of information. In later Mesopotamian culture, scholars and temple specialists watched the heavens carefully, recording lunar cycles, eclipses, planetary appearances, weather signs, and omens. Cuneiform tablets studied by researchers at Yale, Brown, Chicago, Oxford, and other major centres reveal a tradition of observation that became one of the ancient world's most influential intellectual achievements. But once again, the written evidence arrives after the habit. Long before formal tablets of astronomy, people watched the sky because life required it. The farmer needed seasons, the traveller needed direction, the ritual leader needed proper timing, the community needed signs that the world was still behaving according to pattern. Every returning star was a reassurance. Every strange darkness was a question. You feel that question in your chest. What does the sky want? It is not a childish question in an ancient world. It is a practical and philosophical one. If the heavens repeat, perhaps they govern. If they govern, perhaps they warn. If they warn, someone must watch. And if someone watches well, that person becomes valuable. Knowledge becomes authority again, only now the authority is lit by stars. A small group gathers near you on the roof. One person points toward a bright planet low in the west. Another waits, listening. A third marks something on a small tablet or remembers it silently, depending on the age you imagine. Their voices are low. The city below does not need to wait for the universe to continue its business. A quirky fringe tidbit appears at the edge of this subject. Modern people sometimes claim that every ancient sky record proves secret knowledge from a vanished super-civilization. One star chart is found, and suddenly half the internet discovers interstellar management. The calmer view is better. Ancient people had sharp eyes, long patience, dark skies, and powerful reasons to notice patterns. That is enough, more than enough, because careful observation across generations can become extraordinary. A single person may not live long enough to understand a rare cycle. A community can, a temple institution can, a scribal tradition can. Knowledge becomes cumulative when memory is stored, corrected, and passed on. The sky rewards patience, not noise. That is almost unfair to modern life. You cannot hurry a moon. Ancient sky watching also changes the way people imagine power. Earthly rulers come and go, cities rise and fall, floods erase houses, but the heavens return with a steadiness that makes human events feel secondary. A king may claim divine favour, yet an eclipse can make the bravest court whisper. A planet appearing at the wrong time can disturb royal confidence. A strange sky event can turn politics into prayer very quickly. The sky is above kings, so kings seek those who read it. Scholars still debate how early celestial observation influenced the formation of Mesopotamian religious and political systems. Some emphasize the later scholarly tradition, where Omen tablets and mathematical schemes were highly developed. Others suggest that more basic horizon watching, lunar timing, and seasonal star knowledge shaped ritual life long before writing. The safest path is not to collapse these stages together, but to see them as a deepening river. First, people notice, then they remember, then they ritualize, then they record, then they calculate. Each stage preserves something from the stage beneath it. You look toward the moon. Its edge is clean tonight, bright enough to silver the roofline. In many ancient societies, the moon mattered deeply because it changed visibly and returned predictably. It offered a natural count of nights. It shaped ritual timing. It became a measure of absence and renewal. When it vanished, it was not gone forever. It was hidden, waiting, preparing to return. That pattern is too powerful for myth to ignore. Death and return, loss and renewal, darkness and reappearance. Such rhythms enter human imagination long before they become theology. The watcher of the sky becomes a watcher of meaning. A thin crescent can feel like a promise. A full moon can feel like abundance. An eclipse can feel like the universe briefly swallowing its own lamp. Small wonder ancient people worried. You would worry too. Without modern astronomy, an eclipse is not an event on a calendar app. It is the light failing. It is birds changing behavior. It is people looking at one another with the same silent question. Did we offend something? Did someone neglect a right? Is a ruler in danger? Is the world breaking its pattern? Pattern is safety. Broken pattern is terror. This is why the watchers of the sky belong to the hidden timeline. They help transform scattered human fear into organized interpretation. The sky becomes not merely seen, but read. Once it can be read, signs can be ranked. Good signs, bad signs, ambiguous signs, signs requiring ritual response, signs suitable for telling a ruler something he may not enjoy hearing. A dangerous profession, perhaps. Useful, but dangerous. In later Mesopotamia, celestial omens could connect sky events with earthly outcomes. A lunar eclipse might be linked with danger to a king. Planetary movements might be studied for meaning. Storms, strange births, and other events could enter a broad web of signs. To modern science, these links do not predict fate. To ancient society, they created a language between cosmos and kingdom. And language creates relationship. If the heavens speak, humans must answer. That idea may be older than the Anunnaki in its emotional roots. Before divine councils in myth decide destinies, the visible heavens already seem to display order beyond human reach. Before gods are imagined assigning fates on tablets, the stars seem to write patterns across darkness. Before cosmic bureaucracy, there is cosmic repetition. Later theology may formalize what the sky first suggested. There is order above, you are below it. Learn to read, or suffer surprise. You remain on the roof as the hours pass. The city grows quieter. A watchman coughs near a gate. A breeze moves over the wall, carrying the smell of cool dust and drying reeds. The person beside you marks the position of a star against a familiar roof line. Perhaps nothing dramatic will happen. Most nights do not announce their importance. They simply add one more observation to the patience of generations. That is how systems grow, not through constant revelation, through repetition respected enough to be remembered. The Zero civilization may have included such watchers in forms now impossible to recover. Not astronomers with formal tablets, not priests with full temple libraries, but men and women who knew the sky as part of survival. They may have linked particular stars with migration, planting, flooding, or ceremony. They may have told stories about lights that returned faithfully, and others that wandered like restless divine animals. Over time, those stories could become gods, or gods could wear those lights as symbols. The distinction may blur in ancient memory. A star is not only a star when a community depends on its return. A planet is not only a planet when its motion is woven into kingship, omen, ritual, and fear. The sky becomes populated because human attention populates it. Each light is given character. Each cycle becomes a message. Each irregularity demands explanation. You look again at the temple platform below. Its upper edges seem to answer the horizon. Its rituals answer the calendar. Its gods answer the sky. The whole city feels suspended between mud and stars, between canal work and celestial order. That is Mesopotamia's genius. Perhaps it binds the most practical labour to the widest imaginable structure. Clear mud from the canal. Watch Venus rise. Bring grain to the temple. Fear the eclipse. The same world holds all of it. The watchers of the sky reveal that civilization is not only a matter of walls and writing, it is also a matter of attention. What does a society choose to notice? What does it repeat? What does it fear? What does it teach the next generation to watch when the night grows clear and everyone else sleeps? You know now that what came before the Anunnaki may not have been one race, one kingdom, or one secret city. It may have been a long education of the human senses, eyes trained on stars, hands trained on clay, feet trained on ritual paths, shoulders trained to labour, ears trained to hear authority in old stories. The gods came into a world already listening. Above you, the stars continue their slow movement. They do not explain themselves. Yet below them, humans have spent thousands of years trying to turn their silence into meaning. And perhaps the oldest watchers, forgotten by name, helped build the first bridge between fear and order simply by lifting their faces in the dark and refusing to look away. The night folds back into clay, and the symbols begin to glow. Not literally, of course. The clay does not shine by itself, it waits in shadow, stubborn, dry, and easily ignored by anyone who does not understand what marks can do. Yet once a sign is recognized, once a name is spoken, once a seal is rolled across damp clay and leaves its tiny procession of figures behind, power changes form. It no longer lives only in bodies, it can travel. You stand in a room where jars, baskets, tablets, and sealed lumps of clay rest in careful disorder. The smell is familiar now. Dust, oil smoke, reed matting, and the faint sourness of stored goods. A small lamp burns near the wall. Its flame trembles whenever someone passes the doorway. On a low surface, a cylinder seal waits beside a damp clay ceiling, no larger than a thumb, yet capable of saying, "This belongs, this was approved, this passed through authority." A seal is a tiny monument. That sounds absurd until you think about it. In ancient Mesopotamia, seals were used to mark ownership, control access, authorize transactions, and identify individuals or institutions. Cylinder seals, rolled across clay, could produce scenes of gods, humans, animals, rituals, and symbols in miniature. Research from museum collections and universities such as Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and Pennsylvania has shown how these small objects reveal social status, administration, belief, and artistic tradition. They are small enough to hold, they are large enough to govern. A sealed jar becomes different from an unsealed jar. A sealed door becomes different from an open door. A sealed tablet becomes a controlled statement. The image left by the seal carries the presence of someone absent. That is the strange magic of administration. A person can command without standing there. Authority becomes portable, repeatable, and harder to deny. The mark survives the hand. This is one language of lost power. Before written sentences explain everything, symbols already organize trust. A sign tells workers which goods belong to a temple. An emblem connects a ruler to a god. A carved animal marks strength, danger, fertility, or protection. A divine horned crown signals sacred rank. A rosette, a star, a flowing vase, a mountain shape, a boat, a gate, or a strange hybrid creature can carry meanings that later viewers only partly understand. The symbol says more than it explains. That is why it lasts. You watch a seal being rolled across damp clay. The motion is smooth, practiced, almost tender. A tiny scene appears, reversed from the carved stone, as if an invisible world has stepped onto the surface. A figure approaches a seated power. An attendant stands behind. Animals rise on either side. A star hovers above. The whole image is smaller than a modern coin, yet it suggests a complete universe of rank, approach, permission, and sacred presence. No speech is needed. Everyone trained to see it understands enough. A quirky tidbit comes from the seal cutters themselves. These artists carve detailed scenes into very hard stones with astonishing precision, often on objects small enough to disappear in a careless pocket. Imagine spending days creating a divine procession the size of a fingernail, then handing it to someone who might drop it in a storeroom. Ancient craftsmanship had nerves of steel, or at least very strong opinions about eyesight. The humour fades when you consider what such images preserve. A seal can outlive the person who wore it. It can outlive the institution that authorised it. It can be found centuries later, separated from its original world, still carrying a scene whose full meaning has slipped away. The object remains. The grammar behind it thins. The god may be recognisable or not. The ritual may be clear or only suggestive. The title may survive, while the voice is gone. Names behave in a similar way. A name is never only a sound. In ancient Mesopotamia, names could carry divine elements, family hopes, social identity, political claims, and theological meaning. A child might be named in relation to a god. A king might take titles that linked him to cosmic order, city protection, military strength, or divine favour. A place name might preserve a memory older than the people currently living there. Names are fossils that still breathe. You hear a scribe recite a divine title in a low voice. The title has been copied many times. It may refer to a god as lord of a city, mistress of a temple, shepherd of people, judge of fates, opener of canals, or guardian of boundaries. These titles do not merely decorate the gods. They tell you what society fears and values: food, water, justice, victory, fertility, stability, protection. The divine title is a map of human dependence. The Anunnaki, too, belong to this language of titles and classifications. Their identity shifts across traditions, but their power is strengthened through naming. To name a group of gods is to gather them conceptually. To place them in lists is to organise them. To assign roles is to make the unseen legible. This may sound dry. It is not dry at all. A divine list is a machine for arranging the invisible. Scholars still debate how to interpret the relationship between divine names, older local cults, and changing political landscapes. Some gods may have begun as local powers tied to specific cities, places, or natural forces. Others rose in importance as their cities gained influence. Some divine identities blended, shifted, or were reinterpreted by scribes across centuries. The open question is how much of an older religious world survives inside later divine names. The answer is difficult because names are conservative and flexible at once. They preserve, they disguise. A god's name can remain while the god's meaning changes. A title can be inherited by a new theology. A symbol can survive after its first explanation is forgotten. Later people may treat the symbol as timeless, though it once emerged from a very particular need. That is how lost power hides in plain sight. You move deeper into the room of tablets and seals. A shelf holds impressions made by officials who are long dead. Their seals once moved through active systems of storage, rationing, exchange, and ritual supply. Now the impressions lie still, but they continue to reveal patterns. Some show contest scenes, some show presentation scenes, some show divine symbols. Some feel almost bureaucratic. Others feel like windows into a sacred drama. The boundary between administration and myth is thin. A jar of oil may be sealed for practical reasons, yet the seal image may invoke divine protection. A ration tablet may list goods, yet those goods may support temple offerings. A royal inscription may celebrate building works, yet its language may frame the king as chosen, commanded, or beloved by a god. Power speaks in layers. It rarely wastes a surface. The hidden timeline now becomes a history of signs. Before writing, there are marks. Before marks, there are gestures. Before gestures, there is recognition. People learn that certain shapes mean danger, belonging, holiness, permission, or memory. A stone placed upright means something. A painted wall means something. A burial posture means something. A token means something. A seal means something stronger because it can be repeated. Repetition makes authority look natural. This is one of the quiet secrets of civilization. If a symbol appears often enough in the right places, it begins to feel inevitable. A divine emblem above a doorway, a royal title at the start of an inscription, a seal impression on every jar that matters. The mind learns to accept the pattern. The pattern becomes background. Background becomes truth. And truth, once softened into habit, is powerful. You pause before a small clay ceiling that has cracked along one edge. The image is incomplete. A figure's head is missing. A star remains. A hand reaches toward something no longer visible. This brokenness feels appropriate. Ancient power reaches you mostly through fragments. You do not receive the full ceremony, the full explanation, or the full emotional world of the people who made it. You receive traces, a star, a hand, a name, a seal. From these traces, scholars reconstruct cautiously. They compare objects, contexts, texts, styles, and layers. They ask whether a symbol belongs to a god, a ruler, a family, a workshop, or an institution. They disagree, revise, and sometimes discover that yesterday's confident label was today's academic embarrassment. This is normal. The ancient world does not surrender itself simply because modern people brought notebooks or funding applications. Still, the fragments speak. They suggest that long before later myths reached polished form, humans were building systems of recognition. They were making authority visible. They were giving memory a shape. They were training one another to respond to certain signs with obedience or respect, caution, or awe. This may be another face of the Zero civilization, not a buried city, but a lost symbolic order beneath later symbols. The first arrangements of sign and response, the early knowledge that a mark can stand for a person, a place, a duty, a boundary, or a power. Once that knowledge exists, gods can become more organized. Institutions can extend farther. Memories can outlive voices. A symbol becomes a bridge between presence and absence. That bridge is essential to civilization. Without it, authority must always be physically present. With it, a seal can command in silence. A name can summon loyalty. A title can carry fear. A divine emblem can make a storeroom feel watched. A written sign can preserve a debt after everyone involved has gone home and tried to forget it. The room grows quieter. The lamp flame lowers. Outside, the city breathes in sleep. Inside, the seals and tablets remain awake in their own way, holding names that once mattered urgently. Some belong to gods, some to officials, some to places now buried or uncertain. Each one is a small knot tied in the long cord of power. You understand now that lost authority rarely disappears cleanly. It leaves marks behind. Those marks can be copied by people who no longer understand them fully. They can be reinterpreted by new rulers. They can be absorbed into the language of gods. They can become sacred because they are old, and old things often persuade the living to lower their voices. Perhaps the Anunnaki inherited not only older rituals and older fears, but older signs of command. The divine assembly needed names. The names needed titles. The titles needed symbols. The symbols needed people trained to believe that marks could carry power. Beneath the written gods, then, lies a much older human discovery. Meaning can be stored outside the body. Clay can remember. Stone can authorize. A name can outlive the mouth. You leave the room softly, as if the broken seals might wake. The night air outside feels cooler against your skin. Above the roofs, the stars continue their silent writing. Below, in clay and stone, humans have answered with marks of their own. And somewhere between those two archives, the language of a lost power continues to wait. The great names fade for a while, and the ordinary people return. Not because the gods have vanished, and not because kings have lost their shine, but because every sacred system rests on bodies that wake before dawn. The temple may claim the grain, the palace may count the sheep, the myths may speak of divine plans and cosmic labour, Yet beneath every high idea stands someone with sore hands, tired eyes, and a small hope that the day will not become worse. You walk through a Mesopotamian street in the early morning. The light is still soft, touching the mud brick walls with a pale gold edge. A baker opens an oven. A potter checks the drying curve of a vessel. A woman carries water while balancing gossip with impressive skill. A child sweeps dust from a doorway, mostly moving it from one meaningful place to another. A brewer stirs a thick mixture that smells of grain, warmth, and sour sweetness. This is civilization without the ceremony. It is not less important. Mainstream archaeology confirms that early Mesopotamian cities depended on a wide world of skilled workers: farmers, herders, fishers, potters, weavers, brewers, merchants, builders, and scribes. Research from major institutions such as the University of Chicago, Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania has shown how economic tablets, workshop remains, tools, and household archaeology reveal the lives behind the monumental face of ancient society. The temples were not floating in heaven, they were supplied from neighbourhoods. This matters because myth can make society appear top-down. The gods command, kings rule, priests officiate, scribes record. But the actual city also rises from below, from repeated labour carried out by people who rarely receive formal praise. The worker beneath the myth is not a background detail. The worker is the mechanism that lets the myth function. You hear the grinding stones first. The sound is slow, heavy, and intimate. Grain crushed into flour is one of the oldest rhythms of settled life. It is not dramatic. It does not produce heroic poses. It produces bread, and bread is more useful than most heroic poses. The person kneeling at the stone may spend hours repeating the same movement, shoulder and wrist trained by necessity. History often forgets the sound of food becoming possible. You do not. Nearby, a potter shapes clay with practiced pressure. His fingers know the vessel before it exists. Too much water, and the wall slumps. Too little, and the clay resists. A good pot is not merely an object. It is storage, cooking, trade, offering, ration, and household survival. If it breaks, someone sighs with the bitterness reserved for practical disasters. The city is made of such small dependencies. A jar matters, a basket matters, a needle matters, a loom weight matters. A quirky tidbit hides in the world of brewing. Beer was not only a drink in Mesopotamia, it was food, ration, offering, comfort, and probably social glue when everyone had been working too long under a difficult sun. Some ancient images show people drinking through long straws from shared vessels. It looks almost ceremonial, almost friendly, and just a little like a group project that finally improved morale. The humour is gentle, but the point is serious. Brewing required knowledge. Grain had to be processed. Fermentation had to be managed. Vessels had to be prepared. Distribution had to be organised. The brewer was not simply making pleasure. The brewer was helping convert agriculture into daily endurance. You pass a weaving area where fibres become cloth. Wool is cleaned, spun, dyed, woven, counted, and moved through households or institutions. Textile production in ancient Mesopotamia could involve large numbers of workers, especially women, in temple and palace contexts. Later tablets record rations and labour groups, giving modern historians glimpses of an immense economic world that can feel painfully human. A line of numbers may hide a line of tired backs. This is why the workers beneath the myth must be remembered. They show how sacred order becomes material. A god may be given a robe, but someone has to spin the thread. A temple may receive bread, but someone has to grind the grain. A royal building may be praised in an inscription, but someone has to carry the bricks. An offering may be called divine, but human hands place it there. The invisible depends on the visible. The divine house depends on the human street. Scholars still debate how ordinary people experience temple and palace institutions. Some emphasize dependency, inequality, controlled labor, and ration systems. Others point to social belonging, economic security, religious participation, and the possibility that institutional work could provide structure in a difficult environment. The truth likely moved between burden and belonging, depending on time, place, status, gender, skill, and luck. Ancient life rarely offers simple categories. Neither does modern life. You enter a courtyard where several workers rest in shade. One has clay under his fingernails, another smells faintly of sheep. A woman with a basket leans against a wall and closes her eyes for a moment, stealing a few breaths from the day. Their conversation is low. They speak of food, family, illness, supervisors, prices, weather, and rumours from another district. This dust too is historical evidence in imagination. Not evidence you can catalogue, but evidence you must allow. People do not live as symbols of a system all day. They complain, they desire, they remember jokes, they misplace tools, they love children, they resent neighbours, they fear debt. They hope for rain at the right time and less rain at the wrong time. They are not lesser because their names are gone. They are harder to recover. That difficulty gives them power in this story. The zero civilization, if understood as the deep foundation of social order, was not built by supernatural figures or royal abstractions. It was built by people who learned skills, repeated tasks, shared food, made things, carried things, lost things, repaired things, and taught others how to continue after them. A civilization is not only its rulers, it is its routines. You can see this in the way ancient occupation shaped identity. The scribe held prestige because writing controlled memory. The potter shaped containers that made storage possible. The farmer managed the risky conversation between seed and weather. The fisher read water, the herder read animals, the healer read symptoms, the midwife read bodies at the dangerous threshold of birth. Each skill created a form of authority. Not all authority wore a crown. The worker beneath the myth may also explain why later gods acquired specific functions. A society full of specialized labor naturally imagined specialized divine powers. If humans divide work into crafts, offices, and duties, the heavens may be imagined doing the same. Gods of writing, grain, water, fertility, judgment, storms, and craft do not feel random in such a world. They mirror the structured complexity of human survival. Heaven reflects the workshop. The workshop reflects the field. The field reflects the river. You pause beside a group of brickmakers pressing clay into moulds. Their movement is steady and nearly silent. One lifts, one turns, one smooths, one sets the brick in the sun. No single brick is impressive. Thousands of them become a wall, a temple, a platform, a city. That is civilization's most modest secret. Scale transforms dull repetition into wonder. Most wonders are repetitive up close. That is worth remembering. As the day grows warmer, the street fills with layered sound. Hooves strike packed earth. A vendor calls. A child laughs, then cries almost immediately, with admirable efficiency. A scribe passes carefully, avoiding a puddle that threatens both dignity and documentation. A dog sleeps in the exact middle of a walkway, confident that civilization will organize itself around him. The city is sacred. It is also deeply ordinary. That ordinariness may be the strongest bridge to the ancient past. You cannot fully know their prayers, but you understand fatigue. You cannot hear their songs, but you understand the comfort of food after work. You cannot stand inside their theology without translation, but you understand the ache of obligation and the need to believe the ache matters. Perhaps that is why myths endure. They make ordinary pain cosmic. The Anunnaki and other divine powers may stand high in the symbolic structure, but beneath them are workers who make the divine world livable. Without labour, divine order remains an idea. With labour, it becomes bread, cloth, oil, beer, brick, canal, seal, tablet, and offering. The myth speaks from above, but it is carried from below. Even the highest gods need someone to sweep the floor. Even sacred houses gather dust. Even destiny requires maintenance. Evening approaches and the workers begin to return toward homes, shared quarters, or further duties that refuse to vanish politely. The air cools. Bread smells stronger. Smoke rises in narrow lines between walls. A potter covers his vessels. A woman counts what remains in a basket. Somewhere, a scribe finishes a tablet that may preserve numbers but not the day's exhaustion. You stand in the fading light and feel the balance shift. The mystery of what came before the Anunnaki is no longer only about gods, floods, stars, and lost kings. It is also about the unnamed people who made systems possible before systems had names. Their work created memory. Their repetition created structure. Their skills created categories. Their burdens created myths that explained why burdens existed. The workers beneath the myth are not beneath history. They are history's ground, and as night settles over the city, you can almost hear them still, not as ghosts, but as the steady rhythm under every ancient story, grinding grain, shaping clay, carrying water, counting sheep, stirring beer, pressing bricks, teaching children where to stand, when to speak, and how to keep the fragile world from falling apart. The city sleeps, but the pattern keeps moving. You begin to sense that ancient history does not travel in a straight line. It circles, it rises, breaks, sinks, and returns in altered form. A settlement becomes a town becomes a city becomes a memory, a temple is built, repaired, abandoned, buried, and built again. A ruler claims order, then another ruler claims to restore what the first one failed to protect. Creation is never finished here, it repeats. You stand at dawn beside a ruined wall where fresh bricks are already being stacked. The air smells of wet clay, straw, and smoke from early fires. Workers move slowly at first, still held by sleep. A supervisor marks a line with cord. A boy carries water in a jar almost too large for his arms. An older woman watches the rebuilding with a face that says she has seen this kind of confidence before. She is probably right. Ancient Mesopotamian archaeology confirms repeated cycles of construction, destruction, renovation, and rebuilding at major sites. Temple levels at places such as Eridu and Uruk show long histories of architectural renewal, while texts from later periods often speak of kings restoring ancient foundations. Scholars from institutions such as Chicago, Oxford, Yale, and Pennsylvania have studied how rebuilding was not merely practical. It could become a political and sacred act. To rebuild was to claim continuity. That matters. A king who repairs a temple does more than fix old bricks. He presents himself as the one who brings order back into a damaged world. A community that rebuilds after flood or conflict does more than survive. It declares that the pattern has not ended. Even ordinary households participate in this logic when they repair floors, raise walls, replaster rooms, and keep family places alive across generations. The ancient world is full of returns. Return to the field, return to the shrine, return to the ancestor, return to the ruined foundation. This rhythm may be one of the oldest structures beneath mythology. In Sumerian and later Mesopotamian thought, the world often appears as something that must be maintained against disorder. Cities need patron gods, temples need offerings, canals need clearing, boundaries need watching. Kingship may descend, but it can also move away. Order is precious because it is not guaranteed. Everything can collapse. Everything can begin again. A quirky tidbit appears in royal building inscriptions. Some kings love to boast that they discovered ancient foundations and restored buildings according to plans from remote times. You can almost imagine the ancient public relations department nodding with approval. Nothing says legitimacy like claiming your renovation project has divine approval, ancestral depth, and excellent brickwork. The joke is mild, but the strategy is serious. Restoration connects the present to sacred antiquity. It says that the king is not inventing something suspiciously convenient. He is recovering what belongs to the world's proper shape. This is the power of cycles. A new ruler becomes acceptable by presenting himself as the return of old order. The same pattern appears in myth. Creation is followed by disturbance. Disturbance invites correction. Correction becomes a renewed creation. The gods organize the cosmos, but human behavior, divine conflict, flood, noise, rebellion, neglect, or forgetfulness can threaten that structure. The story must then repair itself. A survivor emerges, a king restores, a city is chosen, a ritual is performed, a name is remembered. The cycle turns. You walk through a ritual space where old plaster has cracked beneath new layers. The wall is not one wall, really. It is many walls wearing each other. The floor beneath you covers earlier floors. The offerings placed today rest above offerings whose smoke vanished generations ago. The people standing here may believe they are doing something ancient, and they are right, though perhaps not in the way they imagine. They are continuing a repetition whose first reason may be lost. That's how hidden cycles survive. A ritual repeated long enough can outlive its explanation. A festival may begin with one seasonal need and later become a divine celebration. A mourning practice may begin with fear of the dead and later become family devotion. A rebuilding custom may begin after flood damage and later become a sacred renewal rite. The form remains while the meaning shifts. Civilization is full of inherited forms. Some still have their original fire, others are warm ash. Scholars still debate how much continuity can be safely traced between prehistoric ritual cycles and later Mesopotamian religious systems. Some warn that long gaps in evidence make direct lines risky. Others argue that recurring themes, such as renewal, sacred rebuilding, ancestor memory, and seasonal repetition, suggest deep cultural habits that later institutions formalized. The debate remains open because ancient continuity rarely walks toward us with a label in its hand. It prefers to hide in repetition. The hidden cycles of creation do not belong only to temples or myths. They also belong to agriculture. Every year, seed disappears into darkness and returns as grain. Every harvest feels like rescue, even when expected. Every failure feels like accusation, even when natural. Human beings living close to crops cannot avoid thinking in cycles. Death feeds life. Burial leads to growth. Cutting is followed by storing. Storing is followed by hunger. Hunger is followed by planting again. The field teaches theology without speaking. The river teaches it too. Water rises, withdraws, nourishes, destroys, and returns. A canal silts up, is cleared, and silts again. A bank collapses, is repaired, and collapses years later. The labour is never truly done. Maintenance becomes destiny. No wonder ancient societies imagined the world as something requiring constant service. Creation was not an event. It was a workload. You feel the softness of that truth as workers lift bricks into place. A wall that fell is not treated as simple failure. It becomes an invitation to renew order. A temple rebuilt over older layers becomes a visible statement that sacred time continues through damage. A city restored after disaster becomes proof that the world still accepts human effort. Perhaps that is why the idea of a zero civilization feels so compelling. If earlier societies rose, failed, adapted, and passed on fragments of their systems, then later civilizations may have inherited cycles without knowing their first builders. The oldest pattern might not be a single lost society, but a rhythm of repeated beginnings. Many small worlds ending, many small worlds rebuilt, many explanations layered until the past became sacred depth. The first creation story may have been a memory of rebuilding. That thought changes the question. What came before the Anunnaki? Perhaps earlier names, earlier powers, earlier rituals, and earlier human attempts to explain why everything must be made again and again. The Anunnaki, in later tradition, belong to a cosmos already structured by roles and destinies, but the emotional engine beneath that structure may be the experience of repeated loss and renewal. The city falls, the city rises. The god's house decays, the god's house is restored. The field dies, the field returns. People learn to trust not permanence, but recurrence. This is a subtle kind of wisdom. It does not promise that nothing will be lost. It promises that loss can be answered, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to continue. Ancient myths often live in that space between devastation and repair. They know the world is fragile, yet they also know humans are stubborn builders. Very stubborn, annoyingly stubborn, from the viewpoint of mud, weeds, and collapsed walls. The morning grows brighter. The workers move with more confidence now. Fresh bricks align over damaged foundations. A chant begins somewhere, not grand, just enough rhythm to keep bodies moving together. Someone brings water. Someone adjusts the cord. Someone complains that the clay is too wet, which may be the oldest construction complaint after the discovery of clay itself. The sacred and ordinary keep blending. A rebuilt wall protects the storeroom. A rebuilt storeroom protects grain. Protected grain feeds workers. Fed workers repair the temple. The repaired temple gives meaning to the grain. The cycle tightens until no part stands alone. This is the system reveal in its quietest form. Civilization is a loop of maintenance, belief, labor, and memory. A society survives when these elements reinforce one another. It weakens when one breaks away. If labor loses meaning, people resist. If belief loses food, ritual thins. If memory loses form, continuity fades. If maintenance fails, walls fall and canals clog. The old world understood this not as theory, but as daily pressure. You can feel it in the bricks. You can smell it in the wet straw. You can hear it in the rhythm of tools. The hidden cycles of creation suggest that ancient people did not imagine beginnings as clean, blank spaces. They imagined beginnings as restorations, returns, renewals, and recoveries. Even when a myth speaks of the first time, it may carry the emotional shape of another time when life had to be built again from what remained. That may be why the earliest kings are placed before and after catastrophe. That may be why temples are rebuilt on older temples. That may be why gods inherit older powers. The new world needs the old world beneath it, even if the old world is forgotten, even if only the pattern remains. By noon, the wall has risen higher. It is still rough, still damp, still far from complete. Yet already it casts shade where there was none. Someone sits beside it and eats bread. A child presses fingers into a soft discarded lump of clay, leaving marks that will dry by accident. No one notices. The future often begins in unnoticed marks. The cycle continues. Creation, collapse, rebuilding, remembrance. Not one civilization replacing another in a clean sequence, but many layers breathing through one another. The Anunnaki stand in a later layer, powerful and named, but beneath them the older rhythm remains. Humans build, humans lose, humans explain, humans build again. And perhaps, in that repeated beginning, you glimpse the true shape of the Zero civilization. Not a hidden age before history, a hidden rhythm under history. The path grows narrower here, and the air feels different. You have reached the doorway where careful history and restless imagination stand close together, both listening to the same silence. One holds a brush, a notebook, and a patient respect for evidence. The other holds a lantern, a question, and a habit of peering into cracks where certainty has not yet settled. Neither should be allowed to run the whole journey alone. This is the fringe doorway, not a gate into easy belief, not a trapdoor into wild certainty. More like a shaded passage at the edge of the archive, where unusual theories gather because the ancient world has left too many gaps. Some gaps are ordinary, some are frustrating, some are so large that the human mind begins furnishing them almost without permission. That is how mystery works. It dislikes empty rooms. You stand outside a mound at dusk, where wind moves dust across broken pottery and pale stones. The archaeologist sees layers, sherds, soil colour, and excavation context. The dreamer sees a vanished city, a forbidden chronology, perhaps even survivors from a civilization buried beneath every later myth. The honest listener must allow the dream to speak softly, then ask it to sit down while the evidence is examined. Gently, of course. Nobody likes being corrected by pottery. Mainstream archaeology does not support the idea of a single advanced global civilization existing before Sumer and secretly directing later cultures. Research from major institutions such as Stanford, Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and respected scientific journals points instead toward multiple regional developments, local experiments, environmental pressures, and long sequences of social change. Early complexity grew in many places through human adaptation, not one hidden master plan. That is the grounded path, yet the fringe persists because the questions are real. Why do different cultures speak of floods? Why do ancient monuments sometimes align with the sky? Why do myths place gods, ancestors, or culture bringers in remote ages before ordinary history? Why do later societies describe civilization as something received rather than invented? Why do broken records so often begin as if a previous chapter has already been lost? These are good questions. The danger lies in forcing one answer. A thoughtful fringe question can open curiosity. A careless fringe answer can close it. If someone says, "Ancient people watch the sky with remarkable care," that is fair. If someone says, "Therefore a forgotten star empire designed every temple courtyard," the evidence begins quietly leaving the room. You can almost hear it gathering its coat. The better approach is slower. You consider unusual claims as signs of modern fascination, while still asking what ancient evidence actually allows. Alternative theories often reveal present-day desires. People want the past to be grander, stranger, more connected, and less accidental than official timelines seem to suggest. They want a hidden order behind ruins. They want an older teacher behind human invention. They want mystery to have a centre. That desire is understandable, but desire is not proof. A quirky tidbit belongs to the way fringe theories often treat ancient measurements. A wall faces a sunrise, a number appears in a text, or a myth mentions a long reign, and suddenly the whole Bronze Age becomes a puzzle box designed for modern detectives with dramatic music. It can be entertaining. It can also accidentally insult ancient people by assuming they could not be observant, skilled, or imaginative without outside help. Ancient people deserve better. They were not primitive extras waiting for a cosmic consultant. They watched, counted, built, argued, tested, remembered, and failed forward through generations. That is more impressive than any shortcut. A society that learns to manage water, organize labour, shape clay records, build sacred architecture, and read celestial cycles is already astonishing. It does not become more astonishing by removing human achievement from the story. Still, you do not throw the strange questions away. You place them carefully beside the evidence. Scholars still debate the speed and causes of early social complexity, the role of ritual in gathering communities, the influence of climate change, and the relationships between prehistoric symbolic systems and later myth. These debates are not fringe. They are serious, active, and often wonderfully difficult. The line between bold scholarship and speculation is not always a wall. Sometimes it is a dim threshold, crossed by method rather than mood. Method matters. Ask what layer the object came from. Ask whether the date is secure. Ask what similar finds show. Ask whether the interpretation depends on one artifact or a whole pattern. Ask whether the claim becomes weaker when translated into ordinary language. Ask whether it respects ancient people as human beings rather than turning them into props for a modern fantasy. The fringe doorway becomes safer when walked slowly. You enter an imagined archive of unusual claims. On one shelf are flood memories from many regions. On another are myths of culture bringers. Nearby are arguments about star alignments, lost coastlines, buried settlements, and ancient technologies that may be impressive without being impossible. Some claims are flimsy, some are interesting, some are wrong but poetically revealing. A few may contain questions scholarship has not fully answered. The trick is not to laugh too quickly. The trick is also not to kneel too quickly. Between mockery and belief lies a tension. The zero civilization belongs in this careful space. As a literal claim of a hidden empire before all known civilization, it remains unsupported. As a poetic model for the unwritten systems that shaped later societies, it becomes useful. It lets you think about buried continuity, lost social habits, inherited ritual, forgotten environmental trauma, and the deep structures that existed before written memory. That is a better mystery, quieter, stronger. Instead of asking where the lost capital is, you ask what patterns were inherited without names. Instead of searching for impossible machines, you listen for human systems older than evidence can fully describe. Instead of imagining the Anunnaki replacing an earlier race, you imagine later gods taking form inside mental architecture already built by ancestors, workers, watchers, mourners, and ritual keepers. This does not flatten the story. It deepens it. The ancient world does not need to be rescued from scholarship in order to feel mysterious. Scholarship often makes it stranger. A dated seed, a sealed jar, a child's footprint in mud brick, a miscopied tablet, a buried shrine, a repaired wall, a flood layer, a star omen, a ration list for workers. All of these are quieter than fantasy, but far more intimate. They bring you closer. A forbidden chronology may thrill for a moment. A real handprint in clay can haunt for years. You stand at the edge of the mound as evening darkens. The wind lifts fine dust against your ankles. Somewhere below the surface are rooms, walls, hearths, bones, seals, ash, tools, and broken vessels. Most of them will never become famous. None of them needs to prove an impossible theory to matter. They matter because they belong to lives. Perhaps this is where the fringe doorway becomes most valuable. It reminds you that official history is not complete, not because scholars are hiding the truth in a dramatic underground office, though that would at least make grant meetings more exciting. It is incomplete because the past is damaged, buried, eroded, scattered, looted, misread, untranslated, and sometimes simply gone. There is no need for conspiracy. Time is destructive enough, and because so much is gone, humility is necessary. Archaeology can say much, but not everything. Myth can suggest much, but not prove everything. Imagination can illuminate gaps, but it must not pretend to excavate them. The listener's task is to move between them without turning wonder into certainty. That balance is delicate. It is also beautiful. The Anunnaki stand near the far side of this doorway, surrounded by modern exaggerations and ancient complexity. Popular culture has pulled them into stories of secret origins, hidden creators, and forbidden knowledge. Ancient texts place them in a very different world of divine hierarchy, fate, death, labour, and cosmic order. The gap between those two versions is wide, but the fascination behind both is similar. Humans want to know who stood before them, not just yesterday. At the beginning, the zero civilization answers that desire only if you allow it to remain unfinished. It is not a solved mystery. It is a question about what civilization forgets when it begins writing its own story. It asks whether the first-named gods were already late arrivals in the human search for order. It asks whether memory can survive without names. It asks whether ruins beneath ruins can shape myths without ever appearing clearly in them. You step back from the doorway. No revelation waits behind it. No secret map burns in blue light. Only the old earth, the patient tools, the broken texts, the strange myths, and the soft human need to imagine that beneath every beginning lies another beginning. That need should not be obeyed blindly, but it should not be dismissed with cruelty either. It is part of what makes history human. The dusk settles. The mound becomes a dark shape against the fading sky, and somewhere between caution and wonder, the older question remains alive, not answered, not defeated, and not ready to sleep. The question becomes quieter now and more difficult, not because the mystery is fading, but because the easy shapes have begun to fall away. A lost empire is easy to picture. A buried capital is easy to imagine. A vanished people with one name, one map, and one final message would be wonderfully convenient. History, unfortunately, does not always share our taste for convenience. It prefers fragments. You stand inside the working room of uncertainty, where scholars compare seeds, bones, tools, walls, tablets, landscapes, and climate records. Nothing glows. Nothing announces itself as the final answer. A thin layer of ash may matter. A pollen sample may shift a theory. A change in pottery style may suggest movement, influence, imitation, trade, or simply someone's improved taste in household storage. The past is patient. Researchers are forced to be patient too. One mainstream fact is clear. The rise of early civilization did not happen in one simple leap. Archaeology across the Near East shows long developments in settlement, farming, ritual life, social hierarchy, water management, craft specialization, and exchange. Scholars from universities such as Chicago, Yale, Oxford, Stanford, and Pennsylvania continue to study how these pieces form different patterns in different regions. That is the serious foundation. The debate begins when you ask which piece mattered most. Was climate the great driver, pushing communities into new arrangements as the world warmed after the Ice Age? Was farming the key change, creating food surplus and population growth? Did ritual gathering come first, drawing people into large cooperation before agriculture fully settled them? Did trade networks spread ideas faster than older models allowed? Did conflict sharpen hierarchy? Did rivers teach organization by punishing disorder? The answer may be yes. History is rude like that. It refuses to choose only one cause when several are busy working together. Climate shapes food, food shapes settlement, settlement shapes disease, conflict, memory, and obligation. Ritual shapes cooperation, cooperation shapes labor, labor shapes architecture, architecture shapes authority, authority shapes myth. Myth returns and justifies the whole arrangement. Everything leans on everything else. You walk through an excavation trench in imagination. The walls expose layers like pages in a book written by soil. Dark occupation layers sit above lighter flood deposits. Charcoal flecks mark burning. Pottery changes shape across time. A floor cuts into an older surface. A pit disturbs something earlier. The trench looks still, but intellectually it is noisy. Every layer argues. A scholar kneels with a brush. Another checks notes. A student carries a bucket with the expression of someone discovering that archaeology is mostly dirt with moments of wonder. The sun is high. Dust sticks to skin. The smell is dry earth and warm stone. No one here is hunting fantasy. They are hunting context, which is less flashy and far more dangerous to simple stories. Context ruins easy answers. That is its job. A quirky tidbit belongs to archaeological arguments over tiny things. A burned seed, a chipped blade, or a shard of pottery smaller than a biscuit can become the centre of an intense scholarly debate. Somewhere, a very serious person has built a career from asking whether ancient people preferred one kind of grain processing over another. It sounds small until you remember that civilization itself is made of small things repeated long enough to become enormous. The little evidence matters. It is often all that remains. Scholars still debate whether civilization has a single birthplace, or whether urban complexity emerged through several interacting pathways. Southern Mesopotamia remains central because of its early cities, writing, administration, and temple institutions, yet discoveries across Anatolia, the Levant, Iran, the Indus region, Egypt, and other areas have shown that early complexity was not a single torch passed neatly from one hand to another. The map is more tangled, and the tangle is beautiful. This matters for the mystery of what came before the Anunnaki. If Sumer did not arise from emptiness, and if early Mesopotamian religion absorbed older habits, then its divine world may contain echoes from many sources. Local cults, migrating peoples, trade contacts, environmental memory, household ancestors, ritual specialists, farmer calendars, canal labour, sky watching, political ambition, scribal system building. The Anunnaki stand in a crowded inheritance. They are not alone at the beginning. You listen to the debate about ritual origins. Some researchers argue that large ceremonial sites show symbolic life had power before cities and states. Others warn that ritual evidence is difficult to interpret because a special building does not always mean a priesthood, and a feast does not always mean a temple economy. Still, the pattern is hard to ignore. Humans gathered for meanings larger than food long before imperial archives. The sacred may have helped make society larger, or society may have made the sacred larger. Perhaps both statements circle the same fire. Then comes the debate about climate. The end of the last ice age brought warmer conditions, changing rainfall, shifting resources, and new pressures on human communities. Later droughts and river changes affected settlement patterns in Mesopotamia and beyond. Climate did not write history by itself, but it held the pen with a firm hand. People responded with movement, storage, cooperation, risk, and sometimes collapse. The environment does not command like a king. It persuades like hunger. You feel that persuasion in the landscape. A dry year changes where animals move. A wet year changes where people plant. A river shift turns a familiar place into danger or opportunity. Communities that adapt survive more often. Communities that organize adaptation gain power. Communities that explain adaptation through sacred stories gain continuity. Again, the system forms, not cleanly, never cleanly. The debate about migration adds another layer. People moved, mixed, exchanged tools, married across groups, borrowed techniques, and carried stories with them. Ancient identity was not sealed in a museum case. It moved through bodies, languages, goods, and rituals. A pot style might travel without a population. A word might travel without an army. A goddess might change her name while keeping part of her older face. This makes origins hard to trace. It also makes them human. You stand near a table where maps are spread under lamplight. Lines mark rivers, settlement clusters, trade routes, rainfall zones, and excavated sites. The maps look authoritative until you remember that they represent what has survived and what has been found. Huge areas remain unexcavated. Many early settlements lie beneath later cities, alluvial deposits, modern towns, or waters that have shifted over thousands of years. Absence is not always absence. Sometimes it is coverage. Sometimes it is erosion. Sometimes it is politics, funding, war, or bad luck. This is why scholarly debate remains open. The earliest history of civilization is not a solved puzzle with a few missing edge pieces. It is more like a damaged woven mat. You can see the pattern in places. You can infer some missing strands. But if you pretend the whole mat is complete, you lose the honesty that makes the study meaningful. The zero civilization belongs in those missing strands. As a claim of a known unified predecessor, it remains unproven. As a way of naming the deep, unwritten foundations of later order, it remains useful. It points toward the habits, rituals, fears, and systems that existed before the first full records. It reminds you that the first written civilization was not the first human world of structure. The first tablet is not the first memory. The first city is not the first order. The first god written by name is not the first sacred presence. Perhaps that is the central scholarly tension in softer form. Evidence begins late. Human meaning begins early. Between those two facts lies a darkness where caution and imagination must travel together. Too much caution, and ancient people become silent data. Too much imagination, and they become puppets for modern fantasy. The better path breathes. It allows evidence to lead. It allows wonder to follow. Even the most careful scholar must sometimes say, "We do not yet know." That phrase is not failure. It is one of the most dignified sentences in historical work. It keeps the door open without pretending to see through it. It protects the ancient dead from our impatience. You hear that phrase now like a low bell. We do not yet know. We do not yet know exactly how much prehistoric ritual shaped later Sumerian religion. We do not yet know how many local traditions vanished into divine names. We do not yet know how many early settlements lie hidden beneath river mud. We do not yet know how much myth preserves emotional truth from disasters older than writing. The uncertainty is not empty. It is fertile. The excavation trench cools as evening comes. Shadows lengthen along the cut earth. Tools are gathered. Notes are stored. A small find rests in a padded tray, unimpressive to anyone passing by, important to everyone who understands context. The workers climb out carefully, leaving the layers exposed under a quiet sky. Nothing has been solved completely. Something has been learned. That may be the true rhythm of ancient history. Not revelation, but refinement. Not one dramatic answer, but many careful adjustments to what can honestly be said. The mystery remains, but it becomes better shaped. It loses cheap certainty and gains depth. You look back across the landscape of debates, climate, ritual, farming, migration, trade, hierarchy, language, myth, memory. Each one offers a partial light. None lights the whole room alone. Together, they show a world far older, slower, and more complex than the simple story of civilization suddenly beginning in Sumer. The Anunnaki appear within that complexity. They do not erase it, and what came before them may be less like a throne and more like a web, each strand spun by human need across thousands of years. Some strands are visible, others have broken, some shine under scholarship, others vanish when touched. The night settles softly over the trench. The unanswered questions remain in the earth, and perhaps that is fitting, because the oldest past is not something you conquer. It is something you approach, listen to, and leave partly undisturbed. The earth grows quiet beneath Sumer, not empty, not dead, quiet. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Emptiness suggests nothing was ever there. Silence suggests that something once spoke, then lost its voice through mud, time, heat, water, and forgetting. You stand now over that silence, where the oldest layers of southern Mesopotamia lie hidden beneath later walls, later streets, later temples, later dreams. The surface shows one world, the depth holds others. You're in the land where cities became famous, where Uruk expanded, where Eridu was remembered as ancient, where Ur and Nippur would carry sacred weight. Yet beneath the names are older traces, some recovered, many unreachable, some perhaps destroyed before anyone knew to mourn them. Rivers moved, marshes spread, people built, abandoned, returned, and built again. The land did not preserve the past like a sealed library. It pressed, soaked, shifted, and blurred it. Time is not gentle here. It is a patient eraser. Mainstream archaeology confirms that southern Mesopotamia's earliest history is difficult to reconstruct because alluvial sediments, shifting river channels, high water tables, later occupation, and modern conditions often obscure the oldest levels. Scholars from institutions such as Chicago, Pennsylvania, Yale, and Oxford have long noted that the earliest evidence for settlement, environment, and social change in this region must be interpreted through damaged layers and uneven visibility. That is a sober fact. It is also strangely haunting, because when people ask what came before the Anunnaki, they often imagine that the answer is hidden because someone concealed it. But perhaps the older answer is hidden because landscapes are not archives designed for human curiosity. Mud does not care what future listeners want to know. A river does not preserve a house because it may be useful for a documentary. Floodplains are generous with crops and cruel with memory. The ground gives, the ground takes. You walk across a low mound at evening. Broken pottery crunches faintly beneath your sandals. Wind moves fine dust against your ankles. A shepherd passes in the distance with animals that make soft complaining sounds, as if even goats find ancient history emotionally demanding. The mound looks modest, almost sleepy, yet it may contain centuries of occupation stacked inside it. One floor over another, one hearth above an older hearth, one life resting above another life. A mound is a folded city. Not all of it can be unfolded. At many ancient sites, the deepest levels are the hardest to reach. Later buildings sit on top of earlier ones. Excavation is slow, expensive, delicate, and sometimes impossible. If a living town covers an ancient settlement, the past cannot simply be peeled back without consequence. If groundwater rises, trenches become difficult. If conflict or politics interrupts research, questions remain waiting in the soil. This is why absence must be handled carefully. No evidence found is not always evidence of nothing. Sometimes it means the evidence is underwater, under a road, under a house, under a later temple, under salt, under silt, under administrative difficulty, or under the very ordinary problem that archaeology cannot dig everywhere at once. The ancient world is vast. The excavated world is partial. You feel that partiality now. It creates humility. A quirky tidbit comes from the way some ancient tells, or settlement mounds, can look to an untrained eye like natural hills. Imagine walking past a lump of earth that seems unremarkable, while beneath it lie ovens, graves, jars, walls, tablets, tools, and the remains of people who argued about dinner 5,000 years ago. The past does not always make itself dramatic. Sometimes it disguises itself as bad landscaping. Yet the silence beneath Sumer is not only physical, it is also textual. Sumerian writing preserves much, but it does not preserve everything. It tells you what certain institutions cared to record, what scribes were trained to copy, what elites wanted remembered, what temples and palaces needed counted, what myths achieved literary form. It does not give equal voice to every farmer, every fisher, every woman grinding grain, every child frightened by a flood, every migrant family, every forgotten cult, every small settlement absorbed by a larger city. Writing is a light. It is also a filter. The first written records of southern Mesopotamia reveal administration more clearly than emotion. They show systems, but not always the private breath inside those systems. They count goods more easily than grief. They name officials more often than labourers. They preserve divine titles more often than household doubts. What came before writing is even quieter, but even what came after writing remains uneven. The archive has preferences. Power often decides what survives. Scholars still debate how much early Sumerian texts can tell us about prehistoric memory. Some caution that literate myths were shaped by urban institutions and should not be treated as direct windows into earlier periods. Others argue that myths may preserve older themes in transformed ways, especially around flood, kingship, sacred places, and divine labour. The debate is not a simple fight between belief and disbelief. It is a careful argument over how memory changes when it enters writing. Memory changes a great deal. A family story told for generations may become a city tradition. A city tradition may become a myth. A myth may become a scribal text. A scribal text may become a school exercise. A school exercise may outlive the city that gave it meaning. By the time modern hands recover the tablet, the original human wound or wonder may be nearly impossible to reach. Still, something remains, a shape, a pattern, a pressure. You stand beside a partly excavated wall where the lower courses vanish into unremoved earth. The visible bricks are enough to prove a structure, but not enough to reveal the whole building. This is the condition of ancient history itself. You see enough to know the past was structured. You do not see enough to claim total possession. That incompleteness protects the mystery from becoming cheap. The silence beneath Sumer may be where the zero civilization feels most real, not as a proven society, but as the name for everything that structured human life before records caught it. The first systems of memory, labour, ritual, sky-watching, burial, food sharing, authority, and fear. The first meanings placed on rivers, ancestors, stars, and sacred ground. The first rules repeated until no one remembered they were made. These older patterns may not have had one capital. They may not have had one language. They may not have had a name at all. Perhaps that is why they're so difficult to imagine. Modern minds like names. A name gives edges. It lets a thing enter a title, a map, a museum label, a lecture, a shelf. But some of the most important forces in history move before naming: habit, repetition, obligation, reverence, fear, trust, memory. These forces build worlds without asking to be introduced. The Anunnaki received names. The older forces often did not. You look toward a distant temple mound under the fading sky. Later generations may have believed that divine powers chose such places. They may have told stories of gods assigning destinies, establishing cities, or sending kingship down from heaven. Yet beneath those sacred explanations may lie older human attachments to high ground, water access, ancestor memory, seasonal gatherings, and the stubborn emotional gravity of returning to the same place. Place can become destiny if people stay long enough. A marsh edge becomes a camp becomes a settlement becomes a sacred centre becomes a city becomes a myth of divine origin. Then, after centuries, someone asks where the god came from, when perhaps the deeper question is how the place became powerful enough to need a god. That question lingers. It smells of dust and reed smoke. The silence beneath Sumer also belongs to lost languages and vanished voices. Sumerian itself remains a linguistic isolate, with no securely proven relatives. That fact has fascinated scholars and storytellers alike. It does not prove a mysterious lost race, but it does remind you how fragile the record of speech can be. Languages can dominate, retreat, mix, vanish, or survive in names after daily use has ended. But people can leave words behind, like footprints in drying mud. Then even those footprints crack. Ancient southern Mesopotamia was likely never culturally simple. People moved through it, traded across it, settled in it, and brought practices from elsewhere. The region's later brilliance may have depended on mixture as much as isolation. Yet mixture is hard to recover when most voices are gone. The archaeological record can show artifacts, buildings, and diets. It cannot always tell you how a mother sounded when she called a child home at dusk. That loss is intimate. It should slow you down. You're not looking for a single secret behind Sumer now. You're listening to the many silences beneath it. The silence of unexcavated layers. The silence of perishable materials long decayed. The silence of ordinary workers unnamed by tablets. The silence of early rituals that left only ash and disturbed earth. The silence of stories told before writing. The silence of languages without descendants. Together these silences form a depth, not proof of fantasy, proof of loss. And loss is enough to make the ancient world mysterious. You sit on the mound as night approaches. The sky turns violet, then dark blue. The first stars appear. In the distance, a low line of reeds marks old water. Your hand rests on the ground, and for a moment you imagine the layers below it. A recent surface, a broken wall, a floor, an older floor, a hearth, a burial. Flood silt, clay, ash, a footprint, nothing. Then something older still. The mind wants to keep descending. It may never reach the first layer. Perhaps that is fitting. The first layer of civilization may not be a thing that can be held. It may be the moment humans began to remember together. the moment fear became ritual, the moment labour became duty, the moment place became sacred, the moment a child learned that the world had rules older than any one life. Such moments leave faint traces, but they shape everything. The Anunnaki belong to the visible upper layers, where myth and writing have given divine order a form. Beneath them lies the longer human preparation, darker, softer, harder to name. It is there in mud, brick and silence, in missing beginnings and inherited gestures, in places where archaeology can point but not fully speak. You rise as the mound cools under night air. Nothing dramatic happens. No hidden chamber opens. No final inscription appears. No ancient voice names the zero civilization and solves the question with perfect convenience. Instead, the land remains what it has been all along, a keeper of partial memory. And perhaps that is the deepest truth beneath Sumer. The past is not silent because it has nothing to say. It is silent because so much of what it knows cannot reach us. The last image does not arrive as an answer. It arrives as a ruin under starlight, quiet enough that you almost miss it. A low mound rises from the plain. Reeds move in the distance. The earth is cool beneath the night air. Somewhere, water travels through a channel older than any living memory, carrying silt, moonlight, and the faint reflection of stars that ancient watchers once studied with patient eyes. You stand between mud and heaven. That is where this story has always placed you. Behind you lie the named powers of Mesopotamia, the divine assemblies, the sacred houses, the clay tablets, the kings before the flood, the workers beneath the myth, the seals of authority, and the immense labour of cities that learned to breathe through canals, storerooms, shrines, and fields. Before you lies something less certain, a deeper shadow where human order existed before it could explain itself in writing. The zero civilization remains there. Not conquered, not proven in the easy way, not dismissed either. It rests as a question shaped by everything that came into view. The first sacred places, the first calendars, the first repeated gestures of grief and offering, the first walls raised over older floors, the first duties taught to children as if they had always existed, the first belief that time moved in cycles, that labour belonged to more than the self, and that the unseen world might be listening. Perhaps this is enough. A mainstream fact remains firm. Ancient Mesopotamia produced some of the earliest known cities, writing systems, temple institutions, administrative records, and complex mythologies. Research from major universities and museums has shown that this achievement emerged from many older developments in settlement, agriculture, ritual, exchange, and environmental adaptation. Sumer did not appear from nothing. It rose from layers. Layers are the key, not a single lost throne, not a vanished world glowing beneath the sand. Layers of habitation, memory, fear, invention, loss, rebuilding, and explanation. The story of what came before the Anunnaki may not be the story of one hidden civilization. It may be the story of how civilization itself learned to hide its own beginnings. That is more haunting, because no villain is needed. No secret keeper is required. Only time, water, decay, and the ordinary way people forget the first reasons for the things they continue to do. A ritual survives after its origin fades. A sacred place remains after its first story disappears. A title is copied after its old meaning shifts. A myth explains an institution that may have grown from needs older than the myth itself. The ending is not a wall, it is mist. You walk through that mist toward a city imagined at night. A temple platform rises ahead, pale under moonlight. No one is speaking loudly. A few lamps glow in small windows. A dog sleeps near a doorway with complete confidence in its own importance. A scribe's tablet dries on a shelf. A woman covers a jar. A worker rubs mud from his hands. A priest watches smoke vanish into the dark. Above them, the gods have names. Beneath them, older patterns breathe. That is the shape you carry now. The Anunnaki stand within a sacred system that feels ancient because it is ancient to us. Yet beneath that system are older habits of human life, watching the sky, feeding the dead, returning to high ground, clearing water channels, counting goods, rebuilding walls, telling children that certain places must be approached carefully. The gods inherit human seriousness. Then human seriousness becomes divine. A quirky final tidbit comes from the stubborn life of mud brick. In a dry land, sun-dried bricks can raise impressive buildings, but they also need constant repair. Ancient grandeur was partly a maintenance schedule with better poetry. Every sacred platform, every wall, every official building depended on people who knew that yesterday's achievement could become tomorrow's pile of damp clay. That is humbling. It is also beautiful. Civilization is not a finished object. It is care repeated against collapse. The old temples lasted because people repaired them. Myths lasted because scribes copied them. Fields survived because canals were cleared again and again. Families endured because memory was taught across meals, burials, arguments, and songs. Everything lasting has been maintained by someone, often someone unnamed. Scholars still debate how far older prehistoric traditions can be traced into written Mesopotamian religion. Some warn against reaching too far across gaps in evidence. Others see long memories transformed through myth, ritual, and place. The careful path accepts both caution and wonder. It admits that clay tablets do not preserve the first human fear. It also admits that myths may carry echoes from rooms long collapsed. The question stays open because it must. What came before the Anunnaki? Perhaps the answer is not a name but a condition. Human beings stood inside a dangerous world and tried to make it bearable. They watched cycles, marked places, honoured the dead, organised labour, rebuilt after disaster, and gave meaning to hunger, weather, birth, and death. Later, those meanings gathered divine faces. Later still, scribes pressed those faces into clay. But the need came first. The need to order, the need to remember, the need to believe that the fragile world was held by something larger than accident. You pause at the edge of the temple city as night deepens. The walls seem solid, but you know they are temporary. The records seem official, but you know they are partial. The gods seem ancient, but you know they stand over older shadows. Every certainty has a flaw beneath it, and beneath that flaw may be another. The mind wants a final chamber. History offers a threshold. From here, the zero civilization remains a soft outline behind all the named things. It may be the lost preface of human order, not written in one language or ruled by one people, but formed from repeated attempts to live together under sky, river, hunger, grief, and awe. It may be a civilization of gestures rather than monuments, of memory rather than empire, of habits so old they became invisible. And perhaps that is why it cannot be fully found. It did not vanish from one place. It dissolved into everything that followed. The stars remain above the plain. The river continues its dark movement. Somewhere under the earth, a floor covers another floor. A burial rests below a wall, and a fragment of clay holds a mark whose first meaning has thinned into silence. You listen, and the silence does not feel empty anymore. It feels inhabited. Perhaps the story is not yet complete. Perhaps no ancient story ever is. Perhaps every beginning is only the place where memory finally manages to speak. And if you listen long enough, softly enough, the world before the gods does not give you an answer. It gives you a feeling, a sense of standing beside the first fire, under the first watch stars, among people who do not know they are becoming ancient. They are only trying to survive. They are only trying to understand. And from that trying, everything begins. Word count 1169. Now let the image grow quieter. The mound fades into darkness, and the city softens until it is no longer a city at all. Only warm clay, low roofs, cooling dust, and the faint breath of water beyond the reeds. The temple steps lose their sharp edges. The tablet returns to earth. The seals, the names, the kings, the workers, the watchers, and the gods all settle into one deep, slow hush. You do not need to solve the oldest question tonight. You only need to let it rest beside you. Somewhere in the darkness, an ancient river moves without hurry. It has carried silt across fields, around broken walls, over forgotten floors, and through lands where people once lifted their faces to the same stars you might imagine now. They wondered too. They feared too. They made stories because the night was large and the human heart needed shelter. So let the question become gentle. What came before the Anunnaki may remain hidden, not because it is lost forever in a dramatic way, but because the deepest parts of human memory were never meant to stand fully in the light. Some things survive as traces, some as rituals, some as names whose first voices have gone quiet, some as the soft feeling that every known beginning has another beginning sleeping beneath it. The room around you can become still now. The old rivers keep moving. The stars keep turning. The buried cities keep their secrets without cruelty. And somewhere under all that silence, the first human hands still press meaning into clay, still lift grain from the field, still place an offering near the dead, still watch the moon return after darkness. Nothing has to be finished. Nothing has to be answered. The ancient world remains unfinished, and so does the dream. Let it fade slowly. Let it become dust, water, starlight, and sleep. End of script. Good night.